This episode of the Cult Popture podcast was brought to you by our Patreon. If you want to tell us which films we should watch, get up to 2 extra exclusive podcasts a month, give us something to talk about in the post-credit scenes at the end of each episode, or even contribute to the discussion in the episode itself, then please consider joining the cult and donating at www.patreon.com/cultpopture. Welcome, how's the tune? Welcome along to our show.
Indiana Jones.
It's film franchise Fortnights on the Cult Popture podcast, everybody. My name is AJ, and I'm joined by Richard. And I'm a little distracted, Richard, because I don't mean to brag, but my surname is Jones, and it will be coming up. It will be said a lot on this episode. And I'm looking forward to feeling relevant for the first time on this podcast. And this is, of course, our film franchise Fortnight. So this is where we watch and review a film franchise every fortnight. We've been going for nearly 6 years doing this, 5.5 years.
Yeah.
And I forgot to tell you this before we started recording. I'm hoping this will be an entry point episode for a lot of people, which is why I'm speaking like I don't know you that well. Like I politely, we're acquaintances. Hey, bro, how you going? I once had a flatmate who would talk to his best friends like they didn't know each other that well. It was bizarre. They'd be sitting on the couch. They'd be like, "Oh, what do you think of this, bro?" I'd be like, "Oh, that's cool, bro." And it was just really bad.
I know what you mean. It's the overdoing the bro is like...
Yeah.
Because obviously bro is universal for I've forgotten your name.
Yeah, very good. So that was weird, but we're not talking about that. Instead, today we're going to talk about a name that we all remember.
Saying very good like draws attention to the fact that it was like a joke and not just like a fun observation.
I apologize.
Because it was just like I didn't plan that.
No, fair enough. Hey, look, very good. If you've never heard our show before, we've done all sorts of franchises from Toy Story to The Godfather to Air Bud.
From Godzilla to Godfather.
What? That's pretty good. Why don't we do that? How have we not realized that before? There's got to be at least 2 or 3 other examples of that in the...
With the amount of like tenuous connections we find between franchises, how did we not realize that The Godfather was our second franchise with God in the title?
It's true. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's others and we just haven't worked it out yet. God's Not Dead. From Godfather to Godzilla to God's Not Dead. We haven't done God's Not Dead yet.
Yeah. What about... The Magnificent... Oh, no, that's 7.
What were you going to say?
The Magnificent God.
Oh, right.
But it's the Magnificent 7.
God Bud! Wait, no, sorry.
Yeah, air goddies.
Air goddesses. So, today on the podcast, it's time once again for us to tackle one of the big boy franchises, perhaps one of the longest year boys ever in terms of film franchise canon. Maybe one of, if not the most famous and recognizable film franchises in the world, Richard. We're, of course, going to be discussing the Indiana Jones series. Have you heard of them?
They ring a bell, but I could just be thinking of the fact that your last name is Jones.
As it currently stands, the Indiana Jones series consists of 4 films. They're all currently directed by Steven Spielberg. That's not going to change, but there is a 5th one we'll talk about later.
Unless Spielberg gets cancelled and then like Lawrence Kasdan's like, actually, I directed them all.
They're all also based on a story by George Lucas, and they all star Harrison Ford as the eponymous lead character. Is that what eponymous means?
Eponymous is synonymous with titular.
There you go. I like eponymous better because it doesn't sound like I'm being rude when I say it. Yeah.
Oh, I fucking... What was the word? I had a new word that I was going to drop into the podcast, and I'm going to try and remember what it was and then drop it in and see if you notice.
Okay. I'll be on the lookout.
Fuck, what was it? It was such a good word too.
Hopefully it wasn't eponymous, because I've already run that one into the ground.
Nah, eponymous is child's play.
So the first 3 films in the Indiana Jones series, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and The Last Crusade, were all released in the 1980s, with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which we all remember and is a movie that exists, returned Indy to the big screen in 2008 after a 19-year absence. As if you, the listener, don't know, the series focuses on an archaeologist and his many different death-defying adventures set against the backdrop of various wars and international conflicts of the 1930s and the 50s in the fourth film. This is one of those franchises that is just packed to the brim with trivia, behind-the-scenes stories, giant leaps forward for filmmaking, influential moments of cinema, and of course also enticing rumours, cancelled projects, and other delicious podcasty morsels. So much so that it would be impossible to cover everything in this episode, so do forgive me if I omit your favourite fun fact about the series. We are far from the only outlet to have focused on these movies over the years, so I'm sure you'll be able to find a cracked article or something which discusses the thing you like that I didn't mention about Raiders of the Lost Ark or any of the other films. Tom Selleck was originally cast as Indy, and Harrison Ford improvised shooting the swordsman instead of fighting him in that one scene in Raiders because he had diarrhea. There you go. I feel like those are the 2 big ones. I mentioned them. You can't say I didn't. You didn't mention that Harrison Ford had diarrhea. The diarrhea is the heart of the whole thing. So, first up, we have Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981, directed by Steven Spielberg. Do you know what this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
I would have to assume it's quite high.
You'd have to assume that. Gun to your head. Gun to your head, what's the number, Richard?
94.
It is 95. What gave you an inkling that it was so high? Is it because it's widely regarded
widely
as
considered one of the greatest movies of all time? Yeah, that might be it.
Yeah. What's it about? What is Raiders of the Lost Ark? In some regions called Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. We will get to that. What is it about?
I thought we were just going to breeze right past titles. I'm still looking for this word. I tell you what, it's that's distracting me. I can tell you. I'm scrolling through my fuck yes, got it.
Okay, and you just belt it out immediately.
Yeah,
you're like the surreptitious story of Indiana Jones.
Okay, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So this is archaeologist Indiana Jones, played by Harrison Ford. Fun fact: he was actually going to be played by Tom Selleck.
No
originally.
kidding.
So there's this bit in it as well where he's going to have the sword fight. But he had
just
diarrhea.
Yeah.
I was listening. So yeah, it's like, I mean, the opening scene is iconic, right? That he steals this golden idol from this temple. It's booby trapped, and so he tries to put something down that's the same weight and do a hot swap so that doesn't set off the booby traps, but it does set off the booby traps.
Maybe one of the most parodied scenes in cinema. Up there with The Godfather.
Like straight up, that would actually, you're probably right. And it runs away from the boulder. But yeah, so that's just the opening. It's like we start with him, in the middle of an adventure. But then the main adventure is he's up against the Nazis, literal Nazis, not your your pussy little Nazis you got these days. I'm talking like the real Nazis.
Back in the day when Nazis were cool.
When Nazis were cool, yeah. When Nazis were men.
Yeah, when they actually believed in something. This is a joke, just to clarify for new listeners.
All Nazis are stupid.
Yeah, I actually firmly believe that.
But the whole thing is about the Ark of the Covenant, which is like a religious.
It's in the Bible. Moses carried the 10 Commandments.
Is it legit in the Bible? Yeah. So what actually is the biblical significance of it? Sorry?
Moses and the Israelites carried the 10 Commandments in it, written on stone tablets.
Right, yeah. And then this is the template, the framework for adventure films. They go on a lot. Marion Ravenwood is along for the ride.
Part of the template of adventure films.
Yeah.
Every adventure film's got a Marion Ravenwood. You turn on The Librarian 2 and you'll get a Marion Ravenwood.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they find the Ark of the Covenant. The Nazis open it, and their faces melt
off.
One of, again, the most recognizable, iconic practical effects ever put to film.
It's great that it's taken us this long to get to such an iconic franchise, but they are nice little marks in the sand as we aim to cover every single franchise ever made. To be like finally familiar ground.
Because this one and when we did the Terminator franchise, that was like another like really big land. Have we done any like that this year?
Rocky, you could.
Of course, yeah, Rocky. Rocky would be the last, and then The Godfather and Terminator both last year.
Pirates of the Caribbean last year as well.
Yeah.
I've got two interesting questions for you, Richard.
Is the question itself interesting, or are you hoping for an interesting answer?
Well, I know one of them is an interesting answer. The first question's not that interesting, nor is the answer necessarily needing to be interesting. The first question is, what did you think of the movie? The second question, though, is, had you seen it before?
Right, that is an interesting question. So I'm going to answer these in reverse. So, and this will become more relevant as we get on, but I had assumed I'd seen all of these movies.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen all of Raiders, but I'm not necessarily in the same sitting until this week.
Right.
So much of it is just because it permeates pop culture so much. It's so oft parodied, but it is. Yeah, like it was on TV all the time. My parents are big fans of the Indiana Jones franchise, and so it's like
so
I would have.
Mine, as evidenced by the fact that my mum gave us this
we're
franchise.
doing it. Yeah, but yeah, it's like I would watch the start of it and then get sent to bed. Or I would catch the end of it. I remember being too freaked out to watch the bit where the propeller,
right,
slices up the guy, because I would shut my eyes and I've known for years this isn't what happens, but I assumed it was shown in full detail because it would be coming towards him. I would shut my eyes and then I would see the blood splatter on the thing on the wing, and I go, God, what must be in between when I shut my eyes? It must be horrible. And then next time I was on TV, I found out that was. Yeah, you don't see it.
I love talking to you about these experiences you had as quite a frightened child watching these things, because I would say in practical real life ways, you're a much braver person than I. But when I was that age watching shit like that, I was like, what? And like the part where the Nazis have their faces melted off, I remember my mum, we first watched this on VHS tape, I remember, and we got up to that point and we were so excited. And for some reason, clearly the tape had been rewound back and forth to watch that scene again, and it just went to shit, like it went all digital and we couldn't see the faces melt when that happened.
What would you say makes me braver than you in real life?
I mean, you can bully the landlord when we flatted together and I was too scared to. That's sort of it. You can drive a car and do maths.
Maths, the bravest subject of them all.
It is.
AJ sees two numbers and just freaks out.
Especially
if those numbers are a 6 and a 9 next to each other.
I'm staring at 1981 on my screen right now, and I am sweating bullets.
Yeah, so Raiders, sitting down and watching it, because the melting faces, I am pretty sure I've only ever seen that as an adult, but I have distinct memories of watching other parts of the films as a kid. Like, I think I would have been too scared watching that bit, but I don't. Like, it's a GIF, but I can't remember the first time I ever actually like saw that scene, and if I do, I don't think it was while watching the movie,
Yeah.
And I've got more hilarious experiences with 2 and 3, and not really 4. Well, not really 3, but but what did I think of the film? I mean, it's it's pretty dang hard to fault in any major way.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously, there'll be little stops and problematic corner here and there with any macho franchise from this
Ring-a-ding-ding.
era. But I do. I mean, I think it's like, there's a reason it's considered one of the greatest films of all time. It is maybe one of those films that if you were to watch it for the first time ever today, you would it would seem derivative, but it's like everything is derived from this. And as far as George Lucas, Harrison Ford franchises go, this is the best one by a fucking long shot. Yeah,
it's funny watching the Indiana Jones movies that are considered duds compared to the Star Wars movies that are considered duds, and it's like there is a world of difference between these two qualities.
Like, even if to be completely fair to the other one, which is Star Wars,
which you daren't speak its name.
Like, if we're going completely fair and we compare Indiana Jones to Star Wars, which are both, it's Raiders of the Lost Ark to Star Wars: A New Hope, two films which later received retitlings.
We're going to talk about that.
Okay, well,
no, I'm whetting your appetite.
All right. My appetite is sopping wet.
That's the wrong wet.
I know.
Turns out wet, WHET, was the word of the day you were going to use. And you're like, oh God, now he's used it. And the only way you can use it.
Yeah, no, compare the original ones, that they are probably on a pretty even footing if you compare, like, these genre... not even genre creating films, essentially. I mean, I know like adventure films have been around for like a long time, but they're kind of the tomb raiding sort of one.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
That like this, every like Uncharted, Tomb Raider wouldn't exist without Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
And they're both not the best film in their franchise, I would say.
Yeah, sure.
But are just such solid frameworks for what's to come.
Yeah. I thought that I maybe hadn't seen this movie in so long that I barely remembered it. That's for years people have been like, "Oh, you do a podcast about franchises. Have you done Indiana Jones? They're really good." And I'll be like, "I haven't rewatched them as an adult." But rewatching it, I must have seen this way more recently than I thought, because everything was immediately familiar to me. I must have seen this movie hundreds of times and just don't remember doing that, because every scene was like, yep, now it's this scene. Yep, now it's this scene. And yeah, watching it now through the lens of the podcast and as an adult, I think the film's pretty good. I think it's pretty good, Richard. Though, interestingly, I thought it was pretty amateur in a lot of ways that I think get overlooked quite a lot. In that charming Spielberg was still finding his feet kind of way that, you love to see young directors being scrappy, right? The biggest thing that kind of was like, I was like, that's interesting that this film is so well regarded, is that famously a fun tidbit about this movie is that someone worked out that the plot would play out exactly the same if Indy wasn't involved. He has no impact on the story, and he doesn't save the day as much as he just survives it, which is very interesting because so many screenwriters and stuff would be like, your character needs to have impact on the story. Your main character needs to be the reason the story happens or saves the day or rescues someone. And that he doesn't even really rescue someone. He just gets kidnapped as well, and then everyone dies. So, he doesn't stop the Nazis from ultimately retrieving the Ark, and then when they open it, they just close their eyes. And him and Marion just close their eyes and survive the angelic onslaught, because apparently he knew to do that despite being a skeptic the whole movie. And I think there is a deleted scene where he reads not to look upon the contents of the Ark. Feels like you could have probably just left that in. But fair enough, whatever. Who am I to critique the greatest modern director of all time? Well, at least in this time period, he certainly was. What do you think about that? Do you have any thoughts or opinions on Indy not impacting the plot? Indiana Jones?
It's a famous Big Bang Theory bit.
Ah, really?
Which is kind of what brought it into the forefront. So, but yeah, I did see an article that was like, let's stop with this nonsense. But I did not read that article. Yeah, I mean, like it is. It's essentially just like the arc was going to kill them anyway, so it's like they would just die. But Indy does, because it's like it's your typical kind of adventure film. It's clues and stuff like that, and it's like there are things that are sped up because Indy solved them first.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And he does tell Marion to close her eyes, so I guess that's him saving the day.
But Marion wouldn't be there if it wasn't for Indy.
That's true. Well, I mean, no, that's good then, right? That's him. That is him impacting the plot. So maybe there's more to it than it would seem. But I agree when you said that Raiders isn't the best in the trilogy, and I think this is one.
It's more than a trilogy, AJ. Get over it.
Sorry, you're right. And I think this is one of the reasons it gets a strike down in my book, I think, is because I would have liked to have seen him have more agency in the climax of the film. There's also, I thought, there's a lot more standing around and talking in this one than any of the others. You messaged me while you're watching it and said, for an adventure film, there's not a lot of adventuring or something like that. Do you remember saying that to me?
I have no recollection whatsoever of saying that to you. Like, straight up, I do not remember that. I'm gonna look in our history.
Out of all the movies, I think this one has the most just sort of sitting down scenes. I think I think the second half is a lot better than the first half. This all feels very pointless to be pointing out about.
No, I did. Actually, yeah, I said, for being the adventure film, I don't really feel a sense of adventure. And then I started talking about pirating No Time to Die. But I did, yeah, it's like, I think it takes quite a while to go anywhere. And even though, do not get me wrong, the opening is iconic for a reason, and it's this incredible thing. But it is, it should feel globetrotting the whole movie, and it kind of takes a while to feel that way.
Yeah,
not even necessarily globetrot, but you feel like you're going on an adventure, because a lot of what they do for the first half of the film is very localized.
Yeah, I agreed. This is our second Alfred Molina film. He appears in the opening scene. He's one of the locals that takes Indy into the temple and ends up betraying him and getting caught in a trap. So this is our third that we've watched, a third Alfred Molina film after Spider-Man 2, where he plays Doc Ock, and Monsters University, where he plays Professor Knight. This is also his first ever credited screen role. Indiana Jones, The Raiders of the Lost Ark. And the second time on Film Franchise Fortnights, we've seen him playing someone who is some kind of altercation with a spider-like creature. Because obviously Spider-Man is Spider-Man 2, and in this he gets covered in tarantulas, which are not spiders, so spider-like, but not exactly spiders. And that's your up-top random useless statistic for this movie. The conception of Indiana Jones as a character is very fascinating and extremely well documented. What's interesting about Indiana Jones outside of a lot of other franchises, you could say this about Star Wars as well, is it's one of these rare tentpole pieces of pop culture that was created for film and created for the medium of film. It is not adapted from something like, say, Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. Like, it is invented for film, and as such, there is all this trivia and all this behind the scenes, like, open source material about how he's basically designed by a committee of Spielberg, Lucas, and Kasdan to be the perfect movie character at a time when those three minds in Hollywood were incredible, like, on top of their game. And so I'm going to quote from the IMDb trivia section here, which is not dumb IMDb trivia, but did sum up a lot of the stuff. So I thought I'll just read it here. It says, traditionally, when one of his films was about to open, George Lucas went on vacation to get away from all the hoopla. As Star Wars was just about to open, Lucas went to Hawaii, where he was joined by Steven Spielberg. When the grosses for Lucas's film came in and it was clear that it was going to be a hit, Lucas relaxed and was able to discuss other topics with his friend. It was at this point Spielberg confessed he had always wanted to direct a James Bond film, to which Lucas replied he had a much better idea. I agree, George Lucas. An adventure movie called Raiders of the Lost Ark. The conversation happened while the two were making a sandcastle. After their trip, they got together and developed a script with Lawrence Kasdan. The character was originally called Indiana Smith. This was a reference to a Steve McQueen character named Nevada Smith, but upon Spielberg's insistence, the surname was changed to the much better and classier, I think, of the common Western surnames, Jones. A lot less common. And come on, Indiana Jones feels better in your mouth than Indiana Smith, right?
Someone's been talking to Marion Ravenwood.
One of the most interesting things I discovered in looking at all of this was the idea of Indy being an archaeologist was not always part of it. With Lucas originally, this is hilarious, envisioning the character as a playboy kung fu practitioner, which is insane to me that the idea didn't spring from just having an understanding of what an archaeologist does.
Yeah.
Like, you don't go, archaeology, that involves discovering lost
bones,
temples, like this. That would make a good adventure movie.
You'd think that this would be to archaeology what like Ghostbusters would be to
busting ghosts.
Busting ghosts. That it's Dan Aykroyd's just like, yeah, ghosts are real and real interesting, and write a movie around it.
Yeah, right. And this really, I think, speaks to the immeasurable impact that Indiana Jones has had, not just on adventure movies and dashing heroes, but even real-world perceptions of archaeology. I knew so many kids growing up, my older brother included, who wanted to be archaeologists because they thought that meant going on globe-trotting adventures and escaping dangerous villains and saving the lives of beautiful women. But now we know archaeology is more about dusting, I think. Just dusting.
Dusting, which can mean the adding or removal of dust.
That is true. Very nice. And I think this is also interesting to me, I guess, because we've talked about the Jaws effect, another Spielberg film, which, Jaws is the reason that society at large has this irrational or this overblown fear of sharks compared to how dangerous they actually are. And I wonder if there's an Indiana Jones effect, and I wonder how many people became archaeologists because they thought,
I wonder where as well, like, marine biologist comes from. Like, because marine biologist is like, when you're growing up, it's like, do you want to be an astronaut?
An archaeologist.
Like, archaeologist or a marine biologist. Like, it feels like, like out of every class, you maybe get 10 to 15 of them are going to become marine biologists. Like, I don't know a single marine biologist, no one that I grew up with has grown to be, or an astronaut, to be fair, or a firefighter.
Yeah.
It says a lot about dreams.
Every woman I went to high school with became a nurse.
Yeah.
They all became nurses. I'm not even trying to generalize. It's just like so many of them became nurses. I don't know why. It seems like a horrible, thankless job, nursing. We are going to talk more about the conception of Indiana Jones as a character and the sort of designed by a committee technique. But to do so, Richard, I'm going to need you to keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle as we speed, hurtling straight toward Problematic Corner.
Ooh, I bet this didn't age well. Let's get a life at someone else's expense. I have to warn you, this might get obscene. This the Problematic Corner where ain't nothing PC.
Theme song. You said you wanted me to keep doing
I
funny
do.
intros too.
I do. I was. I did. I forgot about that. Thank you.
So, problematic corner. This is where we try to respectfully discuss things that haven't aged too well, as the theme song you just heard would suggest. And trigger warning for grooming, I guess, is that one of the next to it was nearly what's his fucking name? It was nearly
Indiana Jones.
It was nearly Tom Selleck and Harrison Ford had diarrhea. Next to that, everyone's favorite piece of trivia about this is that Marion's love affair with Indy, which, they meet, they discuss this affair they had 10 years earlier. And this would have meant, if you figure out the ages of the characters, this would mean that Indiana Jones was 27 and Marion was 15 during the time of their love affair. And they didn't have to do it this way. Of course they didn't. The actors weren't that. You know what I mean? Like I think Marion, the actress who plays Karen Allen, was a little bit older than Marion's age, and maybe Harrison Ford was a little bit younger. I'm not sure, but they didn't have to do it this way, but they chose to. And according to IMDb, the script describes Marion as being 25 years old, and George Lucas originally, get this, wanted her to be younger. Than 15.
That's weird.
Steven Spielberg objected to her age at the script conference. Lucas said once she's 16 or 17, it's not as interesting anymore, but she was 15 and he, Indiana, was 25, and they had an actual affair the last time they met. Lawrence Kasdan left her age out of the dialogue, with Marion telling Indiana that I've learned to hate you in the last 10 years. I was a child. So yeah, Lucas wanted her to be younger, and the transcripts, have you heard of these? The Indiana Jones, the Raiders of the Lost Ark transcripts, have you heard about these before?
No.
So there's a famous 1978 brainstorming meeting that Spielberg, Lucas, and Kasdan had where you can basically read the character being conceived of. And this, you can read this online. Here is an excerpt from that transcript from that meeting.
That's fucking cool. What a thing to have to exist.
Lawrence Kasdan says, I like it if they already had a relationship at one point, because then you don't have to build it. George Lucas says, I was thinking that this old guy could have been his mentor, who's Marion's father. He could have known this on... So, and now he's talking about Indy. Indy could have known this little girl since she was a kid, had an affair with her when she was 11.
What the fuck?
Kasdan says, and he was 42 for some reason. He's not 42 at the time. Lucas says he hasn't seen her in 12 years. Now she's 22. It's a real strange relationship. Spielberg said, Spielberg, being the only guy who comes across well in this whole thing, says she has to be older than 22. Lucas says he's 35. He knew her 10 years ago when he was 25 and she was only 12. And then he said it would be amusing to make her slightly young at the time. Spielberg says, and promiscuous. She came on to him. Lucas says, 15 is right on the edge. I know it's an outrageous idea, but it is interesting. Once she's 16 or 17, it's not interesting anymore. But if she was 15 and he was 25 and they actually had an affair and that was the last time they met and she was madly in love with him and Spielberg says she has pictures of him. So, fucking weird to hear how people talked about age discrepancy in
imagine having your own words, not me saying it right now, quoting him, but imagine having you coming up with and saying the phrase when she's 16 or 17, it's less interesting. Just documented forever.
Yeah. And
you don't want that. What an insane thing to say.
And I almost understand the idea of wanting to make it like an edgy, like tumultuous past they have, but this ain't it, Chiefs. And I think it's creepy and it's weird, and it makes me think that maybe like discourse around pedophilia and grooming just weren't. People didn't talk about that at the time, and so this was because back then, and the movie is set in the 30s, meaning their relationship would have been in the 20s, and that's not especially it's not good, but it's not especially uncommon of that kind of relationship to have. But it is very funny to know that there's this fountain of creativity that's been recorded from a 1978 meeting across 3 days. And at one point, that they've created this cool character, and then one of them's like, "And we should make him a pedophile." If anyone is interested in more of this transcript, by the way, there is a super cool sort of radio play style reading of it, of some of it, I should say, on the YouTube channel Now You See It, called Indiana Jones and the Lost Transcript. It is a genuinely interesting peek behind the curtain of how some pretty incredible filmmaking minds design a character and his trademarks, as well as some iconic moments that they discuss. They talk about the tomb and all the traps, and they talk about the pit of souls with the snakes. You hear them reverse engineer realize that he should be scared of snakes, because they get to the pit of souls first and they're like, there has to be a danger down there that is unique to Indiana Jones, so it specifically applies to him. And then they go, well, what if it's snakes? Nobody likes snakes. And then we go, okay, well, let's set up earlier in the film that he doesn't like snakes. You know what I mean? It's super interesting stuff. And
yeah, because it's funny, you watch these, like, there's a million fucking essays and video essays out there that are like, explain why these things, like, and it's cool to have the idea that you can hear them doing that same thought process, but
just like me, like I do when I'm brainstorming an idea.
Yeah, well, it's like, so often there's a lot of these things that you like, and especially you would think that with pro storytellers like those three, that you don't have to articulate, or you don't have to like think. It's just obviously, like, you think it comes naturally, but it's cool to hear them thinking out loud, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. We can head on down now to Dumb IMDb Trivia, if you like, which is a very fun segment on our show where if you mine the depths, if you plumb the depths of IMDb Trivia, you'll find that a lot of it is user-submitted, a lot of it's worded pretty poorly, a lot of it just isn't trivia. And so I've got some examples here from Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you can be the person who decides how dumb these pieces of trivia are. Here's the first one. The name of the sadistic Nazi interrogator is never mentioned in the film, although Marion calls him her Mark. But his name is Tot, T-O-H-T, pronounced like Todd, the German word for death. The role was offered to Klaus Kinski, who wrote the book Kinski Uncut. He wrote in the book Kinski Uncut that Steven Spielberg offered him a part in his movie, but he turned it down and said, as much as I'd like to do a movie with Spielberg, the script is moronically shitty, as so many other flicks of this ilk. Kinski chose to appear in Venom 1981 because the salary was better. Michael Sherrod also auditioned for the role. Ronald Lacey, who had given up on acting to become an agent, was chosen because he reminded Steven Spielberg of Peter Lorre. Tot only speaks a total of 14 lines in English. The rest of his dialogue is in German. If he looks vaguely familiar, it is because of his role as Simolovsky, one of the three reluctant engineers in Firefox 1982, which was released 1 year after this film. So, yeah, it's a piece of trivia that you might recognize an actor from a movie that came out a year later. During the filming of the Well of Souls sequence, a python died after being bitten by a cobra. It's not necessarily that dumb, I just thought it was pretty fucking interesting. It makes our second franchise where a snake has been killed in the process of it, actually, after Friday the 13th.
Have I mentioned this to you recently?
What?
That piece of trivia about Friday the 13th?
No, I just remember it.
I think about that once a day. If you listen to our Friday the 13th episode, so what happened was there's a scene in the original Friday the 13th where like a snake crawls into the cabin and they chop it up with a machete. And it's like, this was an actual snake that they killed on set, and they didn't tell the snake handler. He was off camera, and it's like, this guy, it's his snakes. He takes into movie sets, and they do. And I believe it was like in the commentary or something like that they're kind of like laughing at it. They're like, yeah, we had to hold this guy back. And it's just like this funny anecdote about the thing. And it's like, especially like fuck. It like literally one of the most like heart-wrenching things I've ever read that's happened on a movie set. Like, especially like as someone who has 2 cats now, that these snakes are this guy's livelihood. I mean, they're just like, you think they're just snakes, but like this is like, this guy, it's his entire job is to create a bond with these animals so that they trust him and he trusts them. and he can lend them out to these film sets. And this snake, it's like its entire life thought like, this is my master and like this is my best friend, and he would never do anything to put me in harm's way. And they just fucking hacked it to bits in front of you. Like any of you with pets out there, imagine if you let your cat or your dog or whatever be used on a film set, and they chopped it up with a machete in front of you and didn't tell you they were going to do that. It's like actually one of the most horrific things I've ever heard.
Well, there you go. Thank you for your impassioned. I agree.
Yeah, but I've been thinking about that so much. like literally pops in my head once a day, and I get so sad.
Speaking of snakes, another entry on IMDb says many of the snakes in the Well of Souls are not snakes, but legless lizards. Look for the ear holes, which snakes lack.
I tell you, I'm not going to. I'm not going to look for ear holes.
I've never heard of a legless lizard, and that's why it's on dumb IMDb trivia, because I don't think legless lizards exist. I think a legless lizard is just a snake. And lastly, Steven Spielberg originally wanted Danny DeVito to play Sala, who is played by John Rhys Davies in the film, and DeVito was set on the role but had to drop out due to conflicts with Taxi, 1978. DeVito later appeared as second banana to Michael Douglas in the Raiders tribute and derivative, Romancing the Stone, 1984. Love a little bit of IMDb trivia sass in there, sassing on the two directors who are probably both friends with each other and blessed each other's projects.
Well, yeah, I mean, Spielberg fucking produced Back to the Future. It's Robert Zemeckis
yeah.
did Romancing the Stone.
Is there anything else you want to discuss about Raiders of the Lost Ark before we move on?
Nah, I think I'm ready to move on.
There's a whole podcast worth of other things to talk about, but in the interest of covering an entire franchise, and what's our record? 4 hours, I think, was Rocky, over 4 hours. So we don't want it to be another Rocky.
There's half as many movies.
Yeah, exactly. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom came out in 1984, also directed by Steven Spielberg. Do you know what this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
Like 72, I would guess.
It's 84% on Rotten Tomatoes. And what is this movie about?
So this is presumably a few years later, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you think that. You think that.
Yeah, Indy is he's now got two sidekicks. He's got Willie Scott, and a 12-year-old sidekick called Short Round.
A Chinese boy.
Little Chinese boy, yeah. They crash land in India, where this whole thing is, they get taken into this temple.
And they get taken into like an Indian village where they're like, our sacred stones have been stolen, and this, means death for the land.
And it's all about, it deals a lot with like voodoo and cannibalism and those kind of things.
Yeah.
And human sacrifice.
Yeah, and they go into this temple, and there's this big scary cult that are ripping hearts out of people and attacking everyone, and they manage to steal the stones, kill the bad guys, and escape. What did you think of this movie, and had you seen it before?
Very interesting question. So, had I seen this film before? Again, I would have assumed that I had, I was like, yeah, I mean, I knew, I could pretty safely tell you my experience with Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I thought I could with Temple of Doom, but watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, I was like, there was a few scenes that I was like, that wasn't in there. Oh, it must be from Temple. Realizing they're actually, in fact, from Last Crusade. But midway through, I was like, I haven't recognized anything so far. Right. And then the whole second half takes place in this temple village thing. And realizing like, I never knew what Temple of Doom was about. And I just didn't realize. Wow. I knew what the Ark of the Covenant was. I knew what the Holy Grail was. I knew what the, spoiler alert, aliens were in the fourth one. But it's like, I never knew what the Temple of Doom looked like or what it was or anything like that. And I messaged you, and I was like, this is not at all familiar. And it'll, once they get into, whatever it's called.
The Temple of Doom.
the Temple, yeah. Oh, you called it something else, I remember. But
Kale Ma is the name of the god.
Yeah, Kale Ma. Yeah, you're like, once they get into there, you'll probably recognize it. And I was like, they've been here for 20 minutes and I don't recognize it. Yeah, so it was interesting. It is Not as good.
Mm-hmm.
It's a classic inferior sequel. The fact that again, it's like the while I said Raiders didn't feel enough like an adventure for me, by the end of it, it feels like it's paid off.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this one, I would say, doesn't.
Well, it almost suffers from the opposite problem where it's not formatted
It front
the
loads
same.
its adventure,
Right, and it's not formatted the same as the other 3 movies in the series because it's not like, hey, Indy, we're hiring you or sending you on this expedition. It's almost like they just kind of fall into the story. It doesn't take place in real time, but it almost feels like it takes place in real time. It's certainly a shorter time period of maybe a day and a half, whereas the other ones seemingly take place over a few days or a week, or whatever. But yeah, I agree that it's lacking in as many iconic moments, but I do think that in a similar respect to how I feel about Ghostbusters 2 being a pretty good sequel, I think Temple of Doom gets a lot of flack for maybe being inferior to Raiders, but it's still pretty good and not a lot of universally agreed upon quote-unquote bad sequels rock 84% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's the kind of score that the first movie in a franchise usually gets. I remember this one pretty well. My main memory of it is we tried to tape it on when it was on TV in the early 2000s, and my brother worked out that if you pause the recording during the ad break, it cuts out the ads for you. But he then forgot to unpause it for about 15 minutes of the final part of the movie, and I remember him crying, and he'll be listening to this episode.
Your dad cried about it.
No, my brother. Sorry.
Sorry.
I always like that this one is quite bleak and scary. I like the idea of a franchise having a black sheep, and while maybe it's the least influential of the OG Indiana Jones movies, I think it's got some pretty cool moments. But Richard, one of the most mind-blowing pieces of movie trivia that I ever learned, and this is my Tom Selleck, this is my diarrhea. I remember I remember where I was when I learned that Temple of Doom was actually a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's right. And this is mind-blowing because depending on how you look at it, it is either entirely arbitrary and doesn't affect the movie at all. The only indication we get that it is a prequel is that it says 1935 at the start, while Raiders is set in 1936. So it's either for no reason, or it actually takes away from the text and makes it a worse movie with an inconsistent timeline, which we'll talk about in a bit. Do you know why it was made to be a prequel? Do you know the reasoning for this decision?
I believe they didn't want it to just be Harrison Ford v Nazis franchise.
Correct, which I think is interesting because if it could still be set after Raiders and I wouldn't be there being like, where are the Nazis? Because they said it in 1935. There were still Nazis during that time. They just said like 1930. Like then you can be like, yeah, it's a prequel. I read a pretty interesting article on Up Rocks by Mike Ryan, which defends Temple as a prequel, pointing out how Indiana Jones is far more of a dick in this film, putting an innocent woman and a child in harm's way in order to seek out fortune and glory, which is sort of the theme of the film. They bring up the buzzwords fortune and glory quite a lot, and that it creates a contrast to the slightly more wholesome character he would become in later movies. And that's all well and good, but I think the bigger problem is that Indiana Jones is famously a skeptic in Raiders of the Lost Ark. He doesn't believe in magic. He's like, no, it's all religious mumbo jumbo. It's hokum pokum. Is that a term? Do people call it that? He doesn't believe in magic, even though a year earlier he witnessed a man's heart pulled out of his chest by a dark underground lord, and then was put under a mind control spell, and was attacked with like a voodoo doll wearing a little fedora, like he has. And also there's a callback to when he shoots the sword fight in the first one, the diarrhea moment, the diarrhea moment, where 2 guys show up and do a little sword play, and he reaches for his gun and doesn't have it, which is clearly intended to be a callback. And it's like it's a secret prequel, a seeky preaky. And because it's like they don't want you to know, they're just doing it so they have this excuse to fall back on, but you're not supposed to think about it and just supposed to see it as being the
a
next
procedural.
one. Yeah, exactly. What do you think of the prequel stuff? We talk a lot about, we're a franchise podcast, and prequels are the
Yeah.
appendix of the anatomy of a franchise, and that they're there, but we're not really sure what their purpose is.
Yeah, it's funny because on the best prequel episode, we did kind of throw out Temple of Doom because we a couple of years ago we did best sequel and best prequel podcast, but because it's like it hides the fact that it's a prequel, and I probably spoke quite confidently that I knew what the plot of Temple of Doom was, and devastated to learn this week that I had no idea. But I think it's like it's not going to be to repeat what we said 2 years ago. It's not going to be the best prequel because, I mean, prequels by and large are pretty bad, but it is there's just so few examples that there aren't many good ones. But by being a good movie, but not nailing, like, there's nothing important about the fact that it's a prequel, and that you have these callbacks that are like, oh, okay, so is the first film a callback then? And two, that it actually like ruins some of the first film.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's
a strange thing. Yeah, I agree that they could have, because their plane crash lands in India.
Yeah,
there's no reason that couldn't have happened in 1937.
Yeah,
and you don't have to be like, why aren't there Nazis in the Temple of Doom?
If we can return just quickly to problematic corner, surprisingly, the last time we'll return for this episode, at least by my count. And I don't know if we need to do the theme song again, but if we do, here it is. If not, I'm still talking. This movie's pretty racist. It is a pretty harmful depictions of Indian characters, beliefs, and cuisine. So much so that the Indian government wouldn't let them film in India, and they had to move to Sri Lanka to film the movie.
Sri Lankans famously okay with racism.
Well, I guess so. Yeah, I was going to defend them, but maybe that's what it means.
Yeah, they're cancelled.
There's a scene where they eat Indian cuisine after being taken in by like this palace, and it's like baby snakes bursting out of a big snake and chilled monkey brains for dessert. Pretty iconic stuff, and according to, I didn't write the name down, but some guy...
Iconic as part of the film, or iconic as cuisine for India?
Iconic as part of the film, not cuisine for India. Yeah. According to one of like the people who worked on the film, it's supposed to be that the people at the palace are like trying to psych Indiana Jones out by feeding him this like ridiculous food that they don't actually eat. I don't know if that's true. Regardless, that joke does not play in this story at all. And then of course we come to, so yeah, I mean that's offensive, but also the its entire lore is set around like Indian mythology and Kale Ma and all these rituals and stuff, which are very othering, I guess, and make it look pretty rotten, pretty evil. And then of course there is Short Round, the 12-year-old Chinese boy, actually played by a Vietnamese kid, I believe, who. This is a difficult thing to talk about, and far be it from me to sound like I'm an authority on it, but he has quite a like broken English, thick accent that I'm sure plenty of Asian kids growing up in the 80s and 90s had "Okay, Dr. Jones" barked at them in a racist impersonation.
Do the voice.
No, I'm not doing the voice. What are your thoughts on Short Round? Do you have any, or even Willie, the woman named Willie?
So Short Round, just quickly, like, it is this thing, and it sucks that Asian American or children growing up would have had this is the best representation they got for a long time, and he is a fun little sidekick. The fact that this is a prequel does sort of raise the issue of like, where is he a year later? But my God, I thought Willie was a horrible sidekick. Borderline ruined the film.
Played by Kim Capshaw, who I want to say married Kate Capshaw. I want to say married Spielberg, or was married to Spielberg. I feel like I've heard that before. Is that true?
Yes, that is correct.
And like the film opens with her doing a pretty fun like musical scene, and that's about as fun as she gets as a character. Otherwise, she's just sort of pretty obnoxiously in the way for a lot of the time.
They appear to still be married as well, actually.
Ah, there you go. I wonder how she feels about being the worst part of what, for a long time, was thought to be the worst Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah. They've been married for 30 years.
Huh, good on him.
Year.
Good on you, Spielberg.
Yeah, let's see. They celebrated their 30-year anniversary last month.
Yeah. Nice. This is one of 2 films to have had influenced the MPAA to create the PG-13 rating classification, because it wasn't quite bad enough to be NC-17, but it wasn't quite safe enough to be rated all ages. The other film...
Or did R not exist at this point?
Maybe, I don't know, actually. You're probably right. We've discussed what the other film to influence the PG-13 rating classification is. We've even discussed that it was responsible for the classification. Do you remember which film this is?
Gremlins?
It is Gremlins, yeah. So we've now completed the duology of the reasons the PG-13 rating system was invented.
And for those playing Down Under, M rating is what we call it here.
Yeah, which is...
more or less the equivalent, yeah.
Yeah, which is funny, isn't it? Because anyone can see an M movie, you know?
I think PG-13, it's the same. It's the same thing.
Like movies that are PG-13 get rated M here.
Yeah, but I think PG-13 is parental guidance is recommended for children under 13, whereas
we have
M here.
We have R13 as well here.
Yeah, we do,
it's
very rare, yeah. V for Vendetta, I believe, is R13.
Hot Fuzz?
Yeah, Hot Fuzz, yeah. I once got denied buying Spider-Man on PS2, which was M-rated, and they said I wasn't old enough. And I was like, not only am I 14 or whatever I needed to, it's not restricted. A 2-year-old could come in and buy this, and she wouldn't let me buy it. And then I went back home, and my sister was having a party when she would have been 16, 17, and she had like all these boys over, and they little old me, 13, 14, however old I was, walked over with like all these like boys who had like just gone through their growth spurts during puberty, and they're like, let them buy the game, and they like bought it for me. So it's quite funny.
I remember being at the end of year 8, so we were all 13 in the class, and the teacher just wanted to chuck on a movie for, to entertain everyone at one of the last days of school. And she decided that because no parent was present, she couldn't in good conscience put on an M-rated movie because it says parental guidance is recommended. But she could put on an R13 movie because you could just do that. Yeah. And she put on the Royal Tenenbaums, in which nudity happens in the first 5 minutes of the film.
Fuck yeah.
So that was very fun. When coming up with the idea for Temple of Doom, though, a few other concepts were considered, including a Lost World pastiche, which would have seen Indy explore a Valley of Dinosaurs, which we, of course, would eventually see with Spielberg in Jurassic Park and Jurassic Park: The Lost World. And another idea...
Sorry, AJ, that's not what it's called.
It's called The Lost World Jurassic Park. Another idea that was chucked around for both this movie and I think the next movie is the incredibly uncharacteristic idea of Indy visiting a haunted Scottish castle. Like, George Lucas multiple times tried to make the haunted castle Indiana Jones movie happen. And look, you wanna read for days, look up cancelled Indiana Jones movies. It's fascinating. We're only going to go into a couple of them here, but there's some really interesting stuff. I've got some more dumb IMDb trivia for Temple of Doom, but this was, I want to give a special thanks to Mike Noyes and the Almighty Watcher from Discord, because I was like, there is too much. Can someone find some dumb IMDb trivia for me? And so they helped me put together this. So it's the Cult Popture Discord, by the way, which you can find a link to in the show notes. Philip Stone previously appeared in The Shining. Club Obi-Wan refers to the Star Wars character. The club at the start of Temple of Doom is called Club Obi-Wan. Played in the prequels by Ewan McGregor. McGregor also appeared in Doctor Sleep, the sequel to The Shining. So we've got a character from this appears in The Shining, and then a character who plays Obi-Wan is in a sequel to The Shining. One of the biggest mysteries in the Indiana Jones franchise is
and also, sorry, the other thing about that is that this was added, in the last 2 years?
Right, it would have been,
when
yeah.
Doctor Sleep came out.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always funny when people have gone back to revisit these things and be like, oh, these, and then it's named.
One of the biggest mysteries in the Indiana Jones franchise is how the first human sacrifice victim manages to survive after having his heart ripped out of his chest. This is likely due to the magical nature of the stones. Thank you for explaining how magic works, IMDb trivia. As of 2019, this is the second shortest Indiana Jones movie. In my opinion, you don't need to denote when something's the second shortest out of 4.
Yeah.
And also, as of 2019, why that? Why is that? It could be 2008. It doesn't need to be 2019. This is when it was written.
Well, I think it's like there's a fifth film on the horizon, and this person isn't committing to
Right.
going back and re-editing it.
The only Indiana Jones movie to display its title on screen using the famous Indiana Jones typeface, and perhaps the only movie ever to show its title partially obscured by an object, in this case, Kate Capshaw, in the foreground. What an insane presumption.
Claim. Jesus Christ.
And I like how it says perhaps the only, so then it's not even a fact. And what they're talking about is she dances in front of the title, and it's like matted so it's behind her. But it's like that would have happened. Like fucking titles appear on the side of buildings in movies now and shit. Like, you know, dynamic opening titles are very common now. And lastly, Steven Spielberg's first sequel, though technically a prequel, as this film takes place in 1935, before Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark in 1981, taking place in 1936, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade 1989 and 1938, and Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull 2008 and 1957. It's like, you don't need to tell me the other movies. This is also a prequel too. So, yeah, that is basically all I have to say about Temple of Doom. I do want to say, like, I don't think this one is the best one by any stretch, but I do quite like its place and where it's nestled, and it being this dark prequel that, you know, almost feels like it's got PSP spin-off energy. You know, there's some great scenes in it. There's Indy when he's in the Club Obi-Wan at the start, like escapes gunfire by knocking a gong off its perch and running along behind it, and there's also a very fun minecart chase scene out of the Temple of Doom, both of which were
great scene.
cut scenes from Raiders of the Lost Ark. So the best thing this movie has to offer is recycled stuff.
like cut from the script, not
cut from
like
the
filmed.
script, correct? Yeah.
But the one sort of scene where I was like, I've seen these shots before is at the end when they've escaped the temple and they're on like a rope bridge. And Indy's in the middle of it, and people are coming either side, and he's like holding his machete up because he's gonna make everyone fall.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh yeah, I've seen this still of Indy. Or
exactly.
Like,
I've
seen a montage of films directed by Spielberg, and there's the shot of him running, realizing there's people on there, and holding a machete.
I thought that as well, that seems to be the most enduring image from this movie, and it's like, why? Is it because he looks the hottest that he does in the whole series?
100%. He looks so fucking hot. Harrison Ford, man, what a fucking oh my god, whole lot of man. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And is it because he's wearing like the platonic ideal of the Indiana Jones outfit, which we haven't actually talked about yet? It's a hat and a bullwhip, which he uses sometimes.
Yeah. That's pretty much it.
He's the man with the hat. And he's back, Richard, for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Did he bring anyone?
We'll let you know. And Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in 1989, also directed by Steven Spielberg. Do you know what this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
89.
88. So 4 more than the dramatically shat upon Temple of Doom. Yeah, so if you don't know what the fuck we're referring to here, is that a fun little anecdote about this movie for Richard and I is that years ago we went to a poster store. Well, it was like a pop cultural artifact store, which mostly sold like salvaged posters from over the years. And we found it was
above a video store. It's like it's just one dude who collected all these, and he worked on the X-Files as well, which I remember being very excited about.
And we were looking through the posters, and we found an Australian exclusive poster for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and it was sort of just this pretty this kind of boring promo shot of
one of the worst movie posters I've ever seen.
of Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford with Sean Connery plays his father in the film, sitting next to him, and exclusively for this poster, the tagline read, "The man with the hat is back, and this time he's brought his dad," which became sort of a template of a common joke for us, which you may have heard us make on the podcast. I'm not sure.
Yeah, like this is actually like one of the enduring personal jokes in our friendship. It's so funny. Like, let's break it down. Not only if you look at the poster, you're like this, like it is just them posing for a photo. It's not a still from the film.
No.
And so it's like not only graphically is it stupid, but referring to him as just the man with the hat
It's very
is
Australian.
so funny.
It's very Australian to be like, the man with the hat.
The bloke with the hat. and this time and it's got like a ... It's so funny, man.
And like just that's the most you can that's the best way you can describe the movie. Like,
this is how they're selling it to you.
I'm about to ask you what this movie is about, and if you're Australian, you'd just say that, right?
Yeah. The man with the hat's back and his Tommy's brought his dad.
So, what is this movie about? Can you tell me?
So we're back to Nazi time.
Thank God.
1930.
Just like in real life.
Yeah. Except these are good Nazis.
Thank you. Hitler's there.
Hitler's the best Nazi of them all.
I don't like this joke at all. I do not think this is the right climate to be making these jokes. Isn't it though?
Yeah, no, well, the thing is, how garbage is it that we can't make fun of Nazis anymore?
And watching this movie where there are like swastika-ridden like parade, like Nazi parades, and like in the late 80s, it was kosher to recreate scenes of Nazism. Because
to cast an extra, and wear a swastika as an extra, on your armband.
And it just be like we can make fun of it because it's this cultural touchstone which most people, a lot of people would have been alive by the time this movie came out who were like soldiers in World War II, and like it's so sad that you probably
it's not even like making fun of it. It's just it's so far removed.
Yeah, and we can show these things on screen because look at our past. Look at this thing that's not happening anymore.
Yeah. I guess like what you're saying is that you can't say anything these days.
No, I'm saying it's sad that there is a resurgence of Nazis, which means it's dicey to reference them in anything. Look at Jojo Rabbit, a film which is very clearly anti-Nazi, and that still got people being like, I don't know if this is okay,
Because Nazis are back.
Nazis are back. And this time they brought their dad.
So, Indiana, we meet Indiana's dad, Henry Jones Sr. If he's senior, then who's junior? That's right. The man with the hat's real name is Henry Jones Jr. But anyway, so his dad, Henry Jones Sr., has gone missing, and so Indy goes to find him, and then they team up. He finds him, and they team up to find the Holy Grail together as the MacGuffin for this film. And it's a
There's betrayal,
classic
bloodshed.
adventure. There's a yeah. What did I think of this film?
Yes.
And had I seen it before?
And had you seen it before?
So this one I've definitely watched the whole way through. I think
this is to the others what Ace Ventura When Nature Calls is to Ace Ventura Pet Detective, and that it's the one that's slightly more appropriate for children. So I think kids see it, like parents.
Well, and it gets played on TV a lot more, I think, as well.
Yeah.
Like, look, we at the Cult Culture Podcast have our issues with Sean Connery. We famously derided his performance in the James Bond films.
He's the worst Bond.
He's most known. It's the worst Bond. He's a shitty human being in real life by a lot of accounts.
Was a shitty human being. He's dead now.
And the world is better off. And yeah, we've constantly dunked on him and called into question his character and the ability of his acting. But my God,
Mm.
this film is top 5 films we've watched for this podcast.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
It's so fucking good, man.
Yeah.
And not only is it so good because of Sean Connery, like he's like, it's not just like fun to have him in the film, but he's also so good in it. It's such a good performance. It's such a fun performance. The chemistry between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery, like two actors who are kind of known for like not really giving a shit with a lot of their characters. Although Harrison Ford, I think that's a little misplaced. I would slightly
We're going to talk about
repudiate those claims that he... But yeah, he does give a shit a lot more than he thinks he does. Than he kind of appears to. But yeah, like it's such a perfect film and such a perfectly crafted film, and it's great. Like people talk about like what's the best third film in a franchise all the time, and everyone goes, technically Logan counts because blah blah blah, and it's like. No, it's this.
First of all, Logan doesn't count, and second of all, it's Last Crusade, man. Like this,
Last Crusade.
This is the definitive
so
threequel.
good.
This is the best threequel, I think, probably.
Yeah, I think so too. It's like, yeah, and I think part of that probably is going for a wider appeal. In a lot of ways, like it tones down, the violence and the sort of more intense scenes. But the film doesn't lose anything because of that.
Yeah,
and. Yeah, just it's firing on all cylinders, and it's really they've cracked the formula. This is the ultimate.
This is such a clear like great application of the Indiana Jones formula that I'm like, why aren't they all this? This is arguably the only one that is like this. And this feels like it sets the format for adventure movies going forward more so than Raiders, I think. And yeah, no, I loved it. I think I think it's the best threequel ever made, but it's more that it's the best threequel that is, I think, definitively better than the first film. Because you can think of something like Toy Story 3, which I think is really good as well, but it's maybe, you could have an argument over whether or not it's better than Toy Story 1 or not. I mean, I guess you could with Indiana Jones. But for me,
I'm sure people would disagree with us.
But for me specifically, I think I would have a hard time picking between Toy Story 1 and 3. I think this is easily better than Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
I think it is more refined. I think it has all the structure that's missing from Temple of Doom, and the acting to sitting around talking ratio is way better than it was in Raiders. I think it's just a clear example of a director who knows more what he's doing more in 1989 than he did in 1981. I think it's the fruits of his labor in that respect, of Spielberg's labor in that respect. And I'll tell you what, I remembered so little about this movie before rewatching it. I remembered the ending, and I remembered like flashes in my mind. But it turns out like this is the one that I had the least that I remembered about. Like I thought it was the first two, but it's actually this one.
Yeah. I think I'd forgotten this was also a Nazi one because I knew that the piece of trivia that they didn't want to just be Indy versus Nazis all the time. Yeah. So in my mind, I thought, they must have worked that out. But then watching the first film, I was like, where's the bit where he runs into Hitler?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And then realized it's like, it's because it's in this film.
Which is a great scene.
A lot fell into place.
What a funny
Fantastic
scene where he bumps into Hitler and gets him to sign the MacGuffin of the film, which is...
Well, no, he doesn't get him to sign it. He's holding the key to finding the Holy Grail and can't let it fall into the wrong hands. And then the wrongest pair of hands who has ever lived, grabs the book off him, and they have this little stare down. And then Hitler just opens it and signs Adolf Hitler and then hands it back to him. And it's because it's the timing of it is so great. The look on his face is so great. And just there's a lot going on. Like he's being shoved between two or three other people and he's kind of looking there and you just don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. And then the signature is just such a perfect little moment.
Yeah. And among other moments as well, I love, any scene where Indy and his dad are bickering, I think is just phenomenal. I agree that Sean Connery is considerably better in this than he is in James Bond.
Yeah. Like watching this film, because I've mentioned a couple of times The Man Who Would Be King. which is another Sean Connery performance that I saw in the last couple of years.
The man
And
who went
really,
the king is back this time.
and like really, really fucking liked that film. And not only that, but really, really liked Sean Connery's performance in it. And I'm like, fuck, do I really like Sean Connery? And I just hate his James Bond. Because even in The Rock, like when we watched that for Random Acts of Cinema, go check that out. That, yeah, I was like, there's a secret sauce to Sean Connery in that film, and it is. I think in The Rock it is a little bit just that. It's like, yeah, he is this larger than life personality, and it's like, holy shit, we got Sean Connery in the film. Even though, you know, I'm not necessarily as blown away by the fact that Sean Connery's in it, that he does have that aura in the way that he's shot, in the way that he's. I am keen to go and watch, because he won an Oscar for a film, and I'm actually now kind of keen to go check it out, because I'm like, fuck, maybe I actually do really like Sean Connery. I just hate, I will never back down from hating his James Bond and all the films he plays James Bond in, because they're fucking garbage.
Agreed. And that's why he was cast in this film, by the way, because they thought it would be funny to have Indiana Jones's father literally be James Bond. One scene I loved in this is the scene on top of the tank where they're fighting, like all the good guys are fighting all the bad guys on top of the tank. There's the shot I remember from it where the tank that Indy's on is heading towards a cliff, and he stands up and his iconic hat gets blown off his head. And it's just a really, really fucking wonderfully choreographed scene in terms of like blocking and the camera work. Like he's hanging off the side of the tank and being squeezed between the tank and a mountainside and that sort of thing. It's just a fucking great scene. And then they think he falls off, and Sean Connery delivering more emotion in a single scene than he did in any James Bond movie. And I'm not joking. That he's more emotional about his son, thinking his son's dead, than I've ever seen him be emotional about anything. And then Indy like walks up behind them and like looks off the cliff with them. It's a great little sequence. And there's another scene I think earlier in this film, which we both described independently of each other as being a perfect joke. Which is like, do you need that in an Indiana Jones film? Maybe not. But I'm so glad you messaged me describing, said this is a perfect joke, because I thought the exact same thing. Like I was just so enraptured by the setup of it and the
it's the kind of joke, and we will tell you what it is, but you just have to wait a little bit longer. But it's like the kind of joke where obviously you it's like a belly laugh, but you want to cheer.
It's
such a good, like, it's like you want, it's the same kind of like release of tension that you want to. I mean, people that are more very familiar with this film will probably know what bit we're talking about. But AJ, put us out of our misery.
So
what's the perfect joke in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade?
He's on a blimp with his dad, a Zeppelin, and his dad starts reading a newspaper, and they've snuck on, and they're wanted, they're fugitives by the Nazi government, and Indiana looks over and sees that one of the like Nazi officers who's looking for them is on the Zeppelin with them, and
knows what they look like,
well. And he's walking around, and Indy gets up and follows a guy who's like checking people's tickets, and when he comes back, you see him disappear into another room. Comes back, he's wearing the outfit of the ticket wearer, the ticket checker,
the ticket officer,
and then what happens, Richard? Take us home.
And then the Nazi is about to, he pulls down the newspaper that Sean Connery is reading, has a brief moment of recognizing him, and then Indy comes up behind him, fucking knocks his bloody lights out, punches him in the head, and then just beats him up and throws him out of the Zeppelin. And then everyone obviously is looking and they're all, so confused as to what's going on. And Indy looks at the room and says, "No ticket."
And at the delivery, and then everyone, of course, bursts into like trying to get their tickets,
trying to find their ticket,
which is a great little stinger for the joke as well. I was so struck by this and how like it's just set up so well. It's like a micro. You could watch that without knowing anything else about the movie, and it makes sense. And it's such an effective moment, which feels true to the character. Harrison Ford, delivering one line feels like it's one of the best performances of his career, just saying those two words.
Yeah, well, like, did you say that you wanted to have a conversation about the general conversation of Harrison Ford's acting ability later on? Because I would love to talk more about Harrison Ford as an actor, but if it's earmarked to talk later, well, let's do it then.
Well,
but
I thought we could do it after the whole movie, because I think it's still a relevant conversation for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
But it is such it's a perfect comic delivery. The timing and just like you say, just everything about it works so well, and it's one of those moments that if you were to watch this in the cinema in 1989, I feel like you would immediately be like, "This is going down in history." This bit,
yeah. And I only vaguely remembered it as well, so it was like I was experiencing it for the first time. This is
like someone on our Discord said, "Oh, I love Last Crusade," and then just said the words "no ticket," and I was like, I had the vaguest memory of like "no ticket" being an Indiana Jones line, but I couldn't remember any context behind it. And then when it came in the movie, I was like, fucking goddamn, what an incredible joke.
This is our 7th Sean Connery movie, by the way, in case anyone was wondering, from film franchise Fortnights. After the 6 Bond movies, this is also our 7th John Rhys Davies movie, after Raiders, the Lord of the Rings trilogy where he plays Gimli, The Living Daylights, the James Bond, Timothy Dalton movie, and he's in The Jungle Book too. And it is also our 2nd Alison Doody film after A View to a Kill, meaning that The Last Crusade stars 3 Bond alumni, none of whom would have interacted with each other or been part of the same generation. Because you've got Sean Connery, Bond, Sean Connery, you've got Timothy Dalton, Bond, John Rhys Davies, and you've got Roger Moore, Bond, Alison Doody. In September 1984, Lucas completed an 8-page treatment for this film. So this is before the film came out, when they were discussing, a third one, because they always wanted it to be a trilogy. And the treatment was titled Indiana Jones and the Monkey King, which he soon followed with an 11-page outline. The story saw Indiana Jones battling a ghost in Scotland before finding the Fountain of Youth in Africa. The screenplay was actually...
Fountain of Youth feels right up the...
it's a Pirates of the Caribbean movie. It's on Stranger Tides. The screenplay was actually fully completed by none other than Chris Columbus, and the director, not the similar figure to Indiana Jones named Christopher Columbus. But it was rejected by Spielberg for various reasons, including, get this, it was too offensive to the African natives.
Nice.
Which is that him learning a lesson, or is that Spielberg prioritizing different ethnicities over each other? We may never know. You can read the script online. It leaked onto the internet in 1997, with many believing it to be a screenplay for the upcoming 4th film. You can, if you are a fan of Indiana Jones, Richard, and I'm talking bigger than the sort of casual fans that we are, there is a wealth of resource there is so much Indiana Jones stuff beyond the movies, and it must be such a rewarding fan base to be a part of. Maybe you get a dud movie after 19 years, but that's maybe a good trade-off for being able to read multiple feature-length scripts of other movies and all the other things that came out, which we'll get to later. What do you think about that idea? Do you think that sounds better than The Last Crusade?
Nothing's better than The Last Crusade.
Do you like the ending where you meet the knight who's guarding the Holy Grail? And
again, it's one of those things that whole sequence is so iconic. I can't believe it's in the 3rd one.
Yeah.
Like to have a franchise of some of the most iconic moments in pop culture history be in the 3rd film in a franchise just feels crazy.
Yeah, I agree.
Because even you think about Star Wars, the kind of from the same era and the same sort of all 3 movies are held in the same high esteem. The Return of the Jedi has the fewest iconic.
You don't think
moments.
Ewoks are iconic?
No.
Do you think River Phoenix looks like a young Harrison Ford? So River Phoenix plays, get this, a 13-year-old Indiana Jones at the start of this movie. Yeah, okay, sure, he's 13. There's very clearly 17-year-old playing a 13-year-old. He plays Indiana Jones for a scene which sort of goes into the origins of the characters.
You said that as if River Phoenix was always 17.
When
The
did
idea
he die?
that well, it's just funny the idea that River Phoenix playing a 13-year-old.
just
It's like
saying
he was 13 at one point as well.
13. He doesn't look 13,
Yeah.
is what I'm saying. But anyway, he plays Indiana Jones at the start of this film, and it's sort of like, it has a few prequel-y moments, but I think because it's a flashback, I can forgive it, where you find out how he got the scar on his chin that I didn't notice Harrison Ford had. And,
It just has.
and why he uses the whip and where he got the hat from. Do you think he looks like young Harrison Ford? Do you think it's good casting?
Yes. I think he looks identical, and I think he looks 13 years old.
Because when I first, this one scene I do remember from the last time I would have watched this movie, and I remember at the time thinking there is no way this guy grows up to be Harrison Ford. And watching it this time, I was like, he looks like a young Harrison Ford.
Well, yeah, actually, fun fact: River Phoenix didn't grow up to be anyone.
Oh God, dude. Okay, we can say that about Sean Connery. I don't know if we can say that about. We can't make River Phoenix death jokes. I don't think. Maybe we can. I don't know anything.
It's been longer than Sean Connery. How old was he when he passed away? He was 23.
So we've got some more dumb IMDb trivia. And Mike Noyes from the Discord helped me out with this again. We've got 3 pieces of dumb IMDb trivia for The Last Crusade. At the end, when the temple is falling apart, Elsa, who's the femme fatale of the film, falls to her death because she refused to let it go. There's a quote from the movie. They say, "You've got to let it go," because she's reaching for the Holy Grail. I nearly called it the Goblet of Fire. A few moments later, when Indy is in the same situation, Henry Jones Sr. tells him to let it go. Elsa is the name of a major character in Frozen 2013, where her iconic song is "Let It Go." What a perfect piece of trivia!
I should have seen that coming. Yeah.
Julian Glover's character, Walter Donovan, is at first presumed to be a good guy, but turns out to be the villain. His character, Christatos, in the James Bond film For Your Eyes Only, so another James Bond, a fourth James Bond alumni, also performs this rarely seen character twist. Here is IMDb trivia claiming that a character betraying the hero is a rarely seen character twist. I'll say it's maybe the only kind of character twist. Some kind of I'm not who you thought I was kind of, rarely seen. What are you talking about? And buckle up, because this is a long one. This is the final piece of dumb IMDb trivia for Last Crusade.
If it's about what kind of guns are used, I do not give a shit.
I promise. When Indiana Jones gets captured by the Nazis after getting betrayed by Dr. Elsa Schneider, she says to him, "Don't look at me like that. We both wanted the Grail. I would have done anything to get it. You would have done the same." To which Indiana replies, "I'm sorry you think so." This minor exchange actually foreshadows the climax of the movie when Elsa tries to leave the temple with the Grail. In that scene, Elsa almost falls into a crevice she created when she crossed the seal of the temple, but Indiana catches her. True to her earlier words, Elsa pulls her hand free to reach the Grail below, but instead of letting Indiana lift her up before she can get it, the glove on her other hand is pulled off and she ultimately falls to her death. Indiana is then placed in the same situation, only he chooses to let it go and let his father save him. Donovan says to Indy that they're only a few steps away from finding the Holy Grail, which prompts Indy to say, "That's usually where the ground falls out from underneath your feet." Guess what happens when the Grail is found towards the end? No question mark. In the scene where Indy is teaching in his class, he tells his students, "We don't follow maps to buried treasure, and X never ever marks the spot, and 90% of all archaeology is done in the library researching reading." Naturally, one of the locations they visit is a library where they don't do any research, but instead break through a giant X in the floor, and a major plot point is following a map that Dr. Jones Sr. made. First of all, that's multiple pieces of trivia that they've crammed into it, and they're also just sort of saying foreshadowing. How foreshadowing functions, and also saying, "Guess what happens?" Like I'm your friend, like I'm your friend. IMDb trivia.
Yeah, we're not friends. Another perfect joke in this film is when Indy's smashing the floor open with a bollard thing, and we cut to the guy in the library stamping the books, and it's perfectly timed with his stamp with the smashing the floor, and so the guy just thinks something's wrong with his stamp. Yeah, it is very good as well. And one thing that always kind of bugged me about that scene that was fixed this time watching it is that they're like, oh, you got to look for the X, the 10, because X marks the spot, because they find like Roman numerals for 1, 3, 5, whatever, and he looks at the floor and he goes, and then climbs up a staircase to look down and then goes, there's the X, and it's obviously done so that we can see it in shot, we can get it in full frame. If I was standing on a big X, I would not need to be elevated to know that it was an X. However, there's a shot later on where you can see the floor, and like it's at ground level, but you can see the floor, and it's a really faint X, and so I think it's like the grain of the sand that's used to make the tile. It's about the light hitting it at a certain angle, which is why he climbs the staircase, not necessarily because he can't identify that it's an X drawn on the floor. So yeah, the perfect film.
One thing that bugged me in a similar, almost that same scene, is when they descend into the tomb below the library. They fall into like water but what looks like water, and then Indy's like, "This is petrol." Which, first of all, excuse me, there's just a reservoir of knee-deep petrol, and then he wraps a cloth up and on a stick and dips it and sets it on fire to use as a torch, which, you're also covered in petrol, Indy, and which is very dangerous. And I was like, it mustn't be. I was like, it must be like a thin layer of petrol above water or something. And then they're walking through this petrol, and you can see the torches like dripping flame into the pool. They walk. They're like, that's how you die. You get blown up, then you having to like swim through it and shit. It's like, why did they make this petrol? It makes the scene, it gives the scene like, I now know what that scene smells like, and it would be unlivable to be there.
Yeah. Although, like the gasoline fumes are flammable, not so much the liquid.
They're probably with those two.
Yeah. But you can extinguish a burning match in a bowl of petrol.
Wow. What do I know then? Do you have anything else you want to talk about with The Last Crusade?
Just check it out. I haven't said that in a while. Check it out. It's a good movie.
And that was the last one, Richard. They never made another Indiana Jones movie.
Todd, thanks for listening to our podcast.
Oh, great stuff. Sorry, they did make another one. Stop pretending it's the worst joke next to calling any sequel a variation of Too Fast, Too Furious.
What a curse that two of our least favorite jokes outside, like just of all time, independently of each other, involve film franchises.
The joke, of course, being implying that this movie doesn't exist. I get it. You didn't like it.
Often also said with the Matrix sequels or the live-action Avatar adaptation.
Yeah. So this came out 19 years later in 2008. It's called Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It was once again directed by Steven Spielberg, who returned. What do you think this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
My inclination would be to say we're talking 30s or 40s.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do have an inkling that it's surprisingly high.
It's a battle of the Inklings. Inkliana Jones.
I'm like talking 70, mid to low 70s.
It has 78% on Rotten Tomatoes. So to all you people who pretend it doesn't exist, if you were just looking at the data, by all accounts, this is a pretty good movie.
By all accounts, it does exist.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's, not even, it's less than 10 points lower than Temple of Doom. Yeah, I mean, I was quite surprised by that Rotten Tomatoes critic score. Can you tell me what this movie's about?
So this one's set in 1957, so it's 19 years later after The Last Crusade. Indy is thrust into a new adventure. This time, there's this crystal skull which, obviously skulls are usually made out of bone, so the fact that this one's made out of crystal is quite unique. It also has a big old fucking egg head. So he meets a greaser named Mutt Williams, played by 2008's hottest actor Shia LaBeouf.
By recently disgraced Shia LaBeouf.
Yeah, it's the most 2008 casting. But yeah, anyway, the whole thing, it ends up being aliens. That's spoilers for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It ends up being aliens, which is treated like a third act film ruining twist. But it's not.
No, it's all throughout. It's
all throughout it.
It's
very clearly aliens from scene one.
Yeah,
more or less.
Which is, I think, better than making it a twist.
I agree.
One of my only memories of when this came out, because it was hype when this came out. Do you remember that? Everyone was like, fucking
100p, bro. I remember downloading the trailer on Apple Trailers.
Yeah, and I remember going up to this girl I knew who'd seen it, and we were both so excited about it, and I was like, "What'd you think?" And she was like, "It sucks. There's aliens in it," and I was just like, "Oh, okay. You didn't need to tell me that." Like, by that point, I'd already heard rumors that it was about aliens.
I remember hearing a rumor beforehand that apparently it might have aliens in it, and being like, "What?"
Yeah. Definitely the legacy of this film, and when people talk about the reason it's bad, I think it's maybe somewhat, we'll talk about it, but it's maybe not only aliens is the reason it's not remembered very
exactly.
fondly.
But it is, it's funny because the trailer has a shot of the opening scene, or one of the scenes near the start of the film, where they're looking for the remains of an alien, and you see clearly in the trailer the word Roswell, New Mexico for a brief moment, which, if that came out today, you would be like, oh my fucking god, the leaked set pics were real. Because of course there'd be leaked set pics that would reveal aliens, because you can't make a movie in secret anymore these days,
as evidenced by Indiana Jones 5.
Exactly, and Spider-Man No Way Home, and also just like set photos are not fair game for spoilers. Trailers are fair games for spoilers. You can post a screenshot from a trailer and be like, holy shit, I can't believe they're doing this. I shouldn't have to worry about scrolling past like a photo taken of someone's cell phone who took a photo of someone else's cell phone who their friend was a mile away from the set, and that confirms that something's in the film or not in the film. That's a little like, I will look at them because I'm a curious person, and then I will regret it. And then I will regret it immediately afterwards. But they shouldn't be treated as if they're fair game. Which Endgame was a big thing. They're like, well, we know where they're going back to the Battle of New York, so you watch any Endgame theory videos, and they're like, well, since we know that time travel's in the film, it's like it was kept out of all the marketing. It's unfair to the creatives, and also to anyone who wants to be surprised by that. But had I seen this film before, and what did I think of it? Good question. Interesting question. So I had seen this film before. I saw it opening day. I went after school with some friends of mine, and it's funny. This was one of those films that I can say this with 13 years of hindsight, that I was probably pretending to be into it more than I was, because now knowing that I've never seen Temple of Doom, and I probably hadn't seen Raiders all the way through, and I never would have watched Last Crusade on my own terms. Like, I only ever would have seen it on TV. We never got it out from the video store or anything, as far as I'm aware. But me and all my friends got super hype, and I was going. First thing after school. There's only a few movies I remember doing that with. One of them was Superman Returns as well.
Yeah, rough go.
But Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was like, yes, super high. And then just watching the film and just one of those kind of slow realizations, like, oh damn, this is bad. And I remember going home that night and talking to my dad about it, and he's a big fan of Indiana Jones. He joined the Patreon to suggest Indiana Jones, and yeah, just sort of breaking it to him that, like, it's not a good film. It's not a good film, and his little heart being broken by it, and he still to this day has never watched it, and was just kind of like, All right, well, I guess I just won't watch that film. Now, again, 13 years of hindsight, what do I think of this film? I would have, if you'd asked me before this week, I would have said, yeah, garbage film, do not watch. Now I would probably say garbage film.
Do not watch?
Don't, yeah, like, it's not as bad as I remember, I'll say that.
Mm-hmm.
I think realizing that the aliens, quote unquote, twist is not so much a twist or like a rug pull. It's drip feeding it to you so that when you actually see a fucking alien at the end of the film, it's not like, well, this came out of nowhere, unless you're just really, really unattentive. Like, and maybe that's what happened. I was 15 and I saw the film and I didn't pick up on all the alien hints throughout. But I think I was probably in denial because I'd heard a rumor that there was aliens in the film, and I was like, there's going to be some way it's not aliens. And I know in our meeting of the elders we have some more kind of discussion about whether or not aliens fit into it, which we'll kind of get into there. But apart from the alien stuff, which and in the past on this podcast I've kind of been championing for franchises to not take themselves so seriously and to just do shit like, yeah, fuck it, put aliens in the fourth one, who cares? But so, the aliens maybe aren't as much of a deal breaker as they would have been 15 years ago. Or no, it's not 2023, is it? I'm looking at a list of Indiana Jones films. The fifth one comes out in 2023, and I'm like, yeah, 15 years. 13 years ago. That there is a lot of other not great stuff in the movie though. There's a famous like back-to-back sequences where they're like Tarzan swinging on vines, and there's monkeys, and then they go, and then there's ants that eat you, which A is scary, and B also just is like stupid.
You didn't like it because it was scary.
Yeah, I didn't like it because it was scary. Yeah, it's too long and it's not very funny. But yeah, I know my dad will be listening to this, and I would say it's been long enough now. Don't get your hopes up, but I'd probably say to check it out just out of interest to finally and if anyone else has been avoiding the film. Yeah, check it out for yourself, even if just to see what all the fuss is about.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I had a much better time with this than I thought I would, and a much better time, I think, with it than I did 13 years ago. It has a lot of problems, but as you said, I don't think the alien issue is really the problem. When I was 15, I didn't really understand the significance of making a movie set in the 1950s, having UFO paranoia as a backdrop, whereas now I understand and respect that decision, and if anything, it's in line. If you're making an Indiana Jones movie in the 50s, it probably should be about Roswell, Area 51. Like, that's not that much of a stretch. I remember at the time people being like, it's just because George Lucas is obsessed with aliens. And it's like, well, maybe, but I don't necessarily like the execution, but the idea on paper I don't think is too bad. And what I now understand is really the film is not that great because of the crappy CGI that feels like it doesn't belong in Indiana Jones.
It's a film ahead of its time in the sense that
it shouldn't be ahead of its time.
They shouldn't have made it when they did, because they didn't have the technology.
Yeah. And you mentioned like swinging on the vines with the monkeys and the ants and stuff like that, which is all really stupid. And there's also the famous nuke the fridge moment, which became a new sort of
jumping the shark for film franchises.
Yeah. Where of course he escapes a nuclear test, a nuclear bomb test, an H-bomb test, by hiding in a lead-lined fridge, which skyrockets him out of the blow-up zone, which he survives despite he would have been tossed around. A 67-year-old man would have been turned to mincemeat. And also, if you roll out of a fridge after escaping an atomic blast, you're going to have radiation poisoning. And then he stands up and looks at the mushroom cloud in what is maybe one of the better shots of the franchise.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's a really nice shot. We put it on our Instagram for this movie, and it's it really does make it look like it's maybe a better movie than it really is. If anything, I would say the thing that lets the alien stuff down, the thing that makes it not as good, is that they try to have their cake and eat it too by explaining that they're interdimensional beings at the end. They're like, no. They're like, are they from space? Like, no, they're from the space between spaces. Then they're called interdimensional beings. And I'm like, no, go hard or go home. They should be from space. I think you are just going to piss people off by trying to say, no, they just look like aliens. Because I think you would actually piss off a lot less people if you said they were interdimensional beings and then didn't make them look like aliens. Because then they're just monsters.
Yeah, just make them beings of pure light.
Which, that's what's inside the Ark of the Covenant. So why not? Which makes a cameo appearance in this movie, which was fun. I think part of the problem with this movie is that the hiatus allowed, the 19-year hiatus, allowed for what everyone believed to be the recipe for an Indiana Jones film sink in, and Indiana Jones movies aren't about aliens, which is something that maybe we didn't know in 1989, but we know it by 2008. No, they're not alien movies, you know? And I think that if this had come out a couple of years after The Last Crusade, people would be a lot more accepting of it. I think it would get a lot more... and like you'd grow up just knowing that there's a fourth Indiana Jones movie about aliens, and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. If you think I'm being generous, well, this idea has existed for fucking ever. George Lucas wanted to do a 1950s alien indie movie for years, right? So it's not too surprising that we eventually got one.
It's just because George Lucas was obsessed with space.
In fact, as early as 1993, Lucas was reportedly working on a screenplay called Indiana Jones and the Saucer Men from Mars. Which is a line in the film. He mentions saucer men from Mars. And I know how ridiculous that sounds. I know that's such an insane title. But I honestly think if I came of age... I
respect the commitment.
Yeah, exactly. And if I came of age and I always knew there were 4 or however many Indiana Jones movies, and one of them was called Saucer Men from Mars. If you grow up with that, it's not going to seem weird. I've used this example before, but it's like how there's just a character named Winnie the Pooh, and like imagine if that was made now, you'd be like, why have you called him a poo? And it's like, but we just grew up with it, so it was accepted as normal, you know? And I think that's what...
Yeah, it was a different time.
Yeah, like the innocent version of it was a different time. And I think... I think that's how we'd feel about Saucer Men from Mars if that existed. And for what it's worth, you can also find a script for this online. You can read the whole thing, as well as a script for Indiana Jones and the City of the Gods, which was another early version of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Well, it would become Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, written by Frank Darabont. But I think, and maybe we'll talk more about this and continue the franchise, I think a really unique to this franchise problem that it has, and I read this on the same article that talked about Temple of Doom as a prequel, I think a really interesting problem is I think there should have just been more of these movies already. I don't think they should have taken a break. I think they should have probably cranked out a few more in the 90s. Everyone wanted to. They just couldn't agree on an idea, and this does feel like a franchise which is finally realizing how many more movies they can get out of it way too late when the actor is in nearly 80 and you know, like I'm disappointed almost that Last Crusade was the last one we had for ages. And I don't know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I was thinking about this as well, that like, especially as well because the first one is just called Raiders of the Lost Ark. If that was just one film, like how would that be looked upon? Would it be weird we never got a second Raiders film? We never got Raiders 2.
Yeah,
it's just so fascinating to imagine a world without this being a franchise. Because like fucking Raiders of the Lost Ark was nominated for Best Picture. Like,
yeah, they were all nominated
for
various Academy Awards except for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Yeah.
One, I think, valid critique of the aliens, you know, I'm sort of sitting here defending them, but one valid critique of aliens being in this movie is the idea of like, it's not the same. Like, the defenders are like, it's the same as there being an Ark of the Covenant or the Stones in Temple of Doom or a Holy Grail. It's the same thing. It's just another mythology. And you brought this up to me earlier this week, and you said you think that's stupid. Do you want to explain why you disagree?
Well, okay. So this is a thing that that repudiate those claims is that...
Wait, is that the word? Is that the word?
It is the word.
'Cause
I've already used it once, but you talked over me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to look up what repudiate meant, and then I was like, wait, why would I be looking up a word? Why do we need the word repudiate when refuse means the same thing?
It's a fucking good word, though. So, yeah, repudiate. I would repudiate those claims because, well, so to me, people are like, yeah, like there's already supernatural stuff, but there's an internal logic to the supernatural stuff we have. Which is like, which is my issue. Like that's more or less it. Again, yeah, if we had aliens in the second one, I would be like, chuck whatever in. But it's the 19-year gap, and then to come back with something that so drastically breaks the rules that have been set, and like, I don't want to come across like I'm a stickler for like, it's, you know, tradition and keeping things the way they are and stuff like that, and again it's not a franchise I've ever been particularly attached to, and it's like I shouldn't have disliked Crystal Skull as much as I did, because as we found out, I hadn't even seen the second one. That like it just breaks the world of the film, that you're taught something for all these times, and then to just go, yeah, this is on the same footing. The rule, and you and I have talked about this off pod multiple times, that you shouldn't have more than one magic in your film. It's fine, but people say, yeah, there's supernatural elements in all three, but it's all the same. It's all based around religion.
Temple of Doom is a different religion to Christianity.
Yes, it is, but that's the thing, that it's like you've still kept an internal consistency. That legends, they're like things heralded as religions are all true, and so it's like, and Temple of Doom being the second film, and you know, and bucking the trend, but still keeping under the wider arc of religion, is, yeah, it's just this internal consistency to then. And the 19-year gap is the other thing that really, if this came out in 93. It wouldn't be such an issue. If
it came out in 93 and then there was a fifth one in 97, you'd just be like, yeah, it's weird. Do you know the fourth one's about aliens? Anyway, time to watch the fourth, the fifth, sixth, seventh one, you know? Like, and it'd just be one movie, but instead, because it had so much gravitas behind it.
So much writing on it.
And then they didn't make another one until, you know, coming out in 2023, it's like we've had to sit with this instead of just quickly moving on, which is kind of what the series should be, these pulpy single-serving adventures. Which another thing this movie does that I don't like is it brings back Mary and Ravenwood, and I'm like, it should be different characters each movie, in my opinion.
It should feel like a procedural, yeah. And the Mark Williams, what they mentioned as well, is revealed to be Indy's son with Marion.
Yeah. And speaking of the supporting cast members, another problem I have is there's so many characters in this who feel like, maybe I'm going back on my words here. I don't know, like there's Mac who betrays him 3 or 4 times, and it's terribly written, and they don't.
Which is quite a rare character.
They don't know what to do with that character, and so they make him a double agent, but then he wasn't actually a double agent. And there's like John Hurt's character. They both feel like, who are these people? Sorry, like you're talking about them like they've been university buddies this whole time, you know, like, and I don't know, I don't quite like that. But Harrison Ford, he seems like such a good sport, doesn't he? I think that.
I think Harrison Ford, and I'd love to talk about him.
Yeah,
he strikes you as the kind of actor who's like, doesn't give a shit, shows up, does anything for a paycheck. And it is really interesting that I believe they've said, or at some point in the development of a fifth film, they've said, we're not killing off Indiana Jones at the end of it. I doubt that's true. I think he's probably going to die in it, but it did seem like, because it was like, you know, the sequel trilogy, Star Wars, was announced, and Blade Runner, then sequel was announced, and then they've been talking about a fifth Indiana Jones for a while, and it sounded like Harrison Ford's just sick of talking about all his iconic characters, and it's just like, just fucking kill me off, because he famously wanted Han Solo to die in Revenge of the Jedi.
Mm.
Yeah, so it seems like he just wants out. But then when Blade Runner came out, and spoilers for Blade Runner 2049, he doesn't die at the end of it. That actually said a lot, I think, about Harrison Ford, because also you watching interviews with him, he's fucking done talking about Han Solo. Indiana Jones is like, he's a lot more passionate about the character, but it is, still a thing. You hear him talk about Blade Runner, and he's actually like, that
Very
seems
engaged.
to be like, he's very engaged, and his most kind of
it's like he's a fan of
probably
Blade
one of his
Runner.
proudest roles.
Yeah,
exactly. And it's one that, especially when there was so much studio interference, and that there is finally this definitive version out in the final cut, that I think he's happy, because he like deliberately tanked the voiceover to try and make the studio version terrible. But the other thing I think about Harrison Ford is that, so it's like he does deeply care about these, but you watch interviews with him, and he tries really hard to make it look like he doesn't. And I think Harrison Ford has like the most like understated, sardonic, and just hilarious sense of humor in Hollywood.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, Harrison Ford is one of the funniest fucking guys on the planet, but it's so he's so funny because he's so good at making you think he's not in on the joke. He absolutely is. Watch any interview with Harrison Ford, and he understands exactly why it is funny.
Yeah.
And like there's a clip showed up on my TikTok the other day that's like him and Ryan Gosling on the Graham Norton's couch promoting 2049, and they say, "Oh, what was it like reading the script?" And he's like, "I read the script, and I read the part played by And then Ryan Gosling's like, "Ryan," and he's like, "Ryan," and then he's like, "And I read it, and I thought we should get." And he like looks at him again, and he's like, Ryan Gosling, and it's like he just keeps pretending to forget his name. It's like he just stumbled in his speech the first time, and Ryan Gosling but then he's like, sees, and he plays into the character of being this curmudgeon-y old dude, and and like there's the other famous clip as well, is like it's one of these magic shows where they go and do magic for celebrities, and he he does this thing, and it's like the card's revealed to be in an apple and Harrison Ford's fruit bowl or something like that, and Harrison Ford's just like, "Get the fuck out of my house." And it's like this is, he understands why that is so funny to you. And the other thing, the third thing I will say about Harrison Ford as a person and as an actor is he's like very old school respectful.
Yeah, we're going to talk about
is that like he never trash talks films that he's been in. A lot of actors will, and many other actors talking about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull would say, "Yeah, it was garbage. Why they put aliens in it? Yeah, just did it for a paycheck." But it's like you very rarely, if ever, will hear Harrison Ford badmouth someone he's worked with or a film he's been in, because he understands how many people go into making a film, and he has that very kind of old school respect.
Yeah, and you're right that he'll never badmouth a film. Maybe a little iffy on if he'll badmouth a person he's worked with, because, Richard, Shia LaBeouf, after this movie came out, recently disgraced Shia LaBeouf, was quoted as saying, "I feel like I dropped the ball on the legacy that people loved and cherished. You get to monkey swinging and things like that, and you can blame it on the writer and you can blame it on Spielberg, but the actor's job is to make it come alive and make it work, and I couldn't do it, so that's my fault. Simple." But then he went on to say that later talking about this destroyed his relationship with Spielberg, and said that after he made these disparaging comments about Crystal Skull, that he said, "Spielberg told me that there's a time to be human and have an opinion, and there's a time to sell cars, and it brought me freedom, but it also killed my spirits, because this was the dude I looked up to like a sensei." Harrison Ford called Shia LaBeouf a, quote, "fucking idiot," and said, I think he was a fucking idiot. As an actor, I think it's my obligation to support the film without making a complete ass of myself. It's no surprise then, sorry, that's the end of the way that this quote that I'm pulling was, it then says it's no surprise that after all this, LaBeouf was fired from the Indiana Jones franchise. But the the quotation marks are after the end of the sentence. I'm pretty sure Harrison Ford didn't say that last part. So yeah, it's interesting that
well, but it's like yeah. So the thing about disparaging co-stars is that it's like it's only when someone breaks that sacred code.
Yeah. Which Shia LaBeouf has done before. He did it with Transformers 2. He shit talked as well. So
well, I mean, Transformers 2 is fucking garbage.
But so is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is phenomenal compared to Transformers 2.
All this being said, in an interview with Empire Magazine in October 2011, Steven Spielberg admitted that he never liked the MacGuffin of this movie, presumably referring to Aliens. He said it was George Lucas's idea and Spielberg only put it in the movie because of his friendship. He said in the interview, "I am loyal to my best friend. When he writes a story he believes in, even if I don't believe in it, I'm going to shoot the movie anyway, the way that George envisaged it," which, respectfully, Mr. Spielberg, sounds like a bad idea. Like, have you ever tried to make something that you're not passionate about? Like, I don't know. That seems like it's not the right way to go. And it's worth as well saying that Harrison Ford and Spielberg apparently repeatedly, what was the word you used? Repudiated George Lucas's attempts to make an alien Indiana Jones movie. But I guess eventually he wore them down.
Do you know what Harrison Ford says is his best role?
What?
It's a film called The Mosquito Coast.
Okay.
You ever heard of it?
No.
Yeah, neither. Apparently,
I thought you were about to say, and that movie was retitled to What Lies Beneath or something.
Apparently this is from, his interview is from 1986, which is the year The Mosquito Coast came out. Why would you fucking write this article in 2021? That's so, oh my God.
He's just doing it again. He's just selling the car. He's selling the car.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So this is a couple of final useless statistics now that we've watched, and discussed all 4 films. Steven Spielberg is now our 7th equal most watched film franchise Fortnights director with these 4 films, Jaws and the first 2 Jurassic Park films. He shares the 7th spot with 3 other directors. Do you have any idea who they might be?
So how many films is it? 7?
7. Is this our best podcast tradition to make each other guess? Just impossibly hard to guess things.
Robert Rodriguez?
No, he's currently winning, second place behind Robert Vince with, I think, 10 films or 9 films.
Who else have we got? Peter Jackson's only 6.
Correct.
Michael Bay's 5.
Mm-hmm.
Who else? Is it spanning multiple franchises?
Two, one of them is, the other 2 aren't. One of them barely is, though, and you're going to kick yourself because it is watch as I brutally mispronounce this, Hideaki Anno. How do you say that? Hideaki Anno, who directed the 6 Evangelion movies you watched, as well as Shin Godzilla, Conrad Helton, who did a bunch of Barbies, and Tyler Perry, who did a bunch of Medea films.
Of course.
This franchise also marks Harrison Ford's 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th appearance on film franchise Fortnights. Do you know what he appeared in that we've seen for the show?
No.
The Expendables 3. Do you remember he was in that? However, with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, we now have 7 Shia LaBeouf films under our belts after Transformers 1 to 3, Nymphomaniac 1 and 2, and Dumb and Dumber he's apparently in. And Kate Blanchett rounds it out, making her 9th appearance on film franchise Fortnights with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Plus, she's in A Hobbit, isn't she?
She's in one of them, at least.
Is she in all 3?
She might even. I'm not going to repudiate claims that she's in all 3.
So she's she is in all 3, and then she's also in Ocean's 8 and Thor Ragnarok, and then this. All 6 Lord of the Rings Hobbit movies. Yeah, so well done, Kate Blanchett. You're climbing the ladder. We love to see it. Dumb IMDb trivia. This one I found all by myself. No one wanted to look at the trivia section for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Karen Allen was not aware her character was in the script until director Steven Spielberg called her in January 2007 saying, "It's been announced we're going to make Indiana Jones 4, and guess what? You're in it again." Karen greeted Spielberg about the same way that Marion greeted Indiana back in the bar in Tibet, given their notoriously problematic relationship. She punched him? What does this mean? Steven Spielberg cast Russian actors in the roles of the Russian soldiers so that their accents would be authentic.
Yep.
Well, Kate Blanchett's not Russian. And finally, the movie features the line, "You've just bought a knife to a gunfight." Sir Sean Connery, who played Henry Jones Sr. in Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade, used a similar line in The Untouchables. So first of all, he said in a different movie, but also the actor said from a previous film said it in a different movie, but also "you've just brought a gun to a knife fight" is a saying. It's not from
Knife to a gunfight. Yeah.
Yeah. And he used a similar line, so it's not even the same line.
One thing as well that's worth mentioning that we didn't bring up, but I remember this film, watching the trailer and watching this film, but just being like, my God, Harrison Ford is decrepit. Should not be. Barely standing. Unwatchably old in this film. And now I'm like, looks pretty fucking good.
Looks pretty great. 60s,
looks
65,
great.
I think. 67.
Great shape. I read a thing that he's kept in such great shape that the measurements for his clothes didn't change between Last Crusade and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But like, yeah, he looks, and it's like, having seen Harrison Ford age in the intervening 13 years, he looks fucking fantastic in this film. But I remember specifically the making fun of at school the next day, being like, "Oh, what was it like?" It's like, "Oh my God, he's so old." The bit where he's like, "Looks like you just brought a knife." To a gunfight. And I remember specifically quoting that line. And then in the film, it's very, "You just bought a knife to a gunfight, kid."
You do a good Ford. I wasn't expecting you to crack out such a good Ford.
I love, there's two real fucking good Harrison Ford impressions, both on Graham Norton, actually. One is just, they're talking about Anchorman 2, and they're like, "What was it like working with Harrison Ford?" And and Will Ferrell's just like, he just sort of comes in the room and is like, and it's almost an entirely visual impression, but he just like cocks one eyebrow and like kind of tilts his head down. And it's just like, as soon as he's doing the face, it's an incredible impression. And then he's just like, "So where are we doing this thing?" Like, and just the talking out. And he can't remember what he actually says, but just sort of mumbles, and they keep trying to talk to like Paul Rudd, who's next to him, or something like that. But then they're like, no. And I think Paul's distracted by how good Will Ferrell's Harrison Ford impression is. And the other one is with Mark Hamill, and they're talking about how the reveal of, spoilers for Return of the Jedi, that for fucking
The Force Awakens.
No, the second one, Empire Strikes Back. Spoilers for Empire Strikes Back. The reveal that Darth Vader is Luke's father.
You're spoiler warning, Luke. I am your father.
I am. It would have been funnier if I managed to remember the name of Empire Strikes Back quicker.
I disagree. I think it's much funnier that I didn't even think for a second you were referring to maybe the most well-publicized spoiler of all time.
It's not maybe. It's definitely. I guess it would be between that and Planet of the Apes being
Sixth
spoiler
Sense.
Earth all along.
Or
we
Sixth
won't spoil it,
Sense.
yeah.
Bruce Willis was Earth all along.
But yeah, that Harrison Ford and James Earl Jones and George Lucas were the only people that knew the twist, because George Lucas told him to be like, "This is how you react." And Mark Hamill says, sat next to Harrison Ford at the premiere, and after that scene comes on, Harrison turns and goes, "Hey kid, you didn't fucking tell me that."
Nice. Very good. All right. we're going to move on now swiftly to our segments. The first of which is a new segment we're doing on our show, Richard, called Meeting of the Elders. And this is a new segment we're doing where if you join our Cult Elder tier over at patreon.com/cultpopture, you get given access to a secret channel on our Discord server where you, the Cult Elders, can discuss the franchise of The Fortnight. And we'll discuss some of your thoughts. Not all, because there are a lot, but we'll go through some of what people have said and, respond back to it. So first of all, my brother Nick, he said, all I remember about the Crystal Skull is that you and I went to see it together, I think, at me, and it was comparable experience to seeing The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. I believe we walked away very disappointed. I responded to that and said, actually, you saw it without me and dangled the spoilers over me until I did see it. I remember sitting in the lounge on my laptop, and for some reason, you'll enjoy this, I was playing Far Cry on my computer.
Okay.
The first one. I remember distinctly playing Far Cry and working out that my brother was not telling us that there are aliens in the new one. Non-heinous Dimitri says, I saw Raiders and Crusade, and then I saw Raiders and Crusade, and then I saw Kingdom. By the time I saw Temple of Doom in my 20s, I thought it was racist and cheesy and overall pure shit. I'd rather watch Crystal Skull over Temple of Doom any day, but I think Last Crusade will always be my fave. I think this is a really interesting opinion that I did briefly share this when I saw this movie in 2008. I was like, it's not as bad as Temple of Doom. I think I've come to appreciate Temple of Doom a lot more, whereas I haven't really come to appreciate.
That's interesting. I've had the opposite, that I, in the few days between watching Temple of Doom for the first time and rewatching Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I've come to dislike Crystal Skull less. I don't like it. I think I only gave it 2 stars, but I don't have as much of a blind hatred for it. I think it's one of those things where it's like you watch a movie that surprises you with how bad it is, and then rewatching it. I had this with Interstellar as well. That rewatching it, it's like, oh, there was stuff in this that I liked that I was just, you don't remember the stuff you liked when when you're surprised by the stuff you hate. And so when you know the stuff you hate is coming, you can enjoy the stuff you enjoyed.
Yeah. Nice. Pre from Michigan, aka Genome, says, I genuinely don't think Crystal Skull is as bad as it's made out to be. It's been a long while since I've seen it or Temple, but while it was a big step down from Raiders and Crusade, it didn't seem to be much worse than Temple. I'll also defend the fridge scene as not being all that much worse from the submarine dive in Raiders or the raft plane jump and sled from Crusade. I believe that's actually from Temple of Doom. That said, the monkey vine swing is utterly indefensible. Yeah, aliens fit the theme. The movies were always representative and paid homage to the pulp fiction of the time period, and the 50s era was when Roswell and aliens came into the vogue, and I feel like Ancient Aliens and Aztecish theme very much fit that archaeological adventure tropes as much as the Holy Relic religious stuff for the European-based ones. Also, I feel like I'm doing a lot of the legwork for the movie I was pretty meh on. And he also... So I think we've already sort of discussed a lot of what he said, but I do agree that I think it's good, actually, that you make a movie set in the 50s and set it against the backdrop of government paranoia and Roswell. It maybe doesn't need to be about aliens, but I like that exists. It's like a really good example of this.
The idea of tapping into the paranoia is a really good idea.
And a really good example of something doing the same thing but much better is Fargo Season 2, which, it's only a spoiler if you haven't seen the first episode because it introduces a UFO element into that season, which I think is one of the best things about the season and is very representative of the 1970s Reagan-esque time that it's set in.
Yeah, but I think I would like to see something that's not so obliquely... actually just alien interdimensional beings. Sorry.
Yeah, they gave you what you wanted.
Yeah. But like, I think I would have liked to have seen that, maybe it is just something that's unexplainable. And maybe it's like just they're beings of pure energy or I think just the fact that you actually see an alien stare Cate Blanchett in the eye. Yeah. Until her eyes burst into flame and then a UFO take off. It's like, okay, this is just it's not clever.
I remember feeling like I'd been punched in the gut when I saw that UFO, like in the cinema. I remember being like, "Wow, this is indefensible. Like this is,
Yeah.
you know."
Yeah, like I think it's just the fact that it's not clever. I expected them to work things in a lot more cleverly.
Yeah. Finally, and the Temple of Dan brought up a lot of the racism brought on by the stereotype of Short Round in Temple of Doom. And Pre from Michigan, Genome said, "I'd love if they brought back Short Round to take over for Indy moving forward now that Harrison Ford is ancient. It would give them an opportunity to try and make up for the racism in Temple of Doom, and would give an Asian actor a shot at leading their own action franchise that isn't martial arts based. Have him go by his real name or have him pick up a new alias. Also, I feel like he'd be a more compelling character than Indy's kid or whatever milquetoast successor they're probably planning on." And I think this is an idea you see a lot, that Short Round should make a comeback, that should be the companion in the new movie. I think that ship's probably sailed. I think the franchise, and by that I mean like the rights holders, the IP owners of Indiana Jones, probably don't want to remind people of their pretty racist depiction of a Chinese kid. So I don't think we'll see Short Round come back, but I why not? Fun callback maybe.
Why not? Because of racism, AJ.
Right. Yeah, I guess I answered my own question. Richard, we talk about titles a lot on the... Sorry, that was Meeting of the Elders. A meeting adjourned. Should we say that at the end?
Yeah.
Meeting adjourned.
We'll get a little meeting adjourned theme song.
A gavel? Oh.
Meeting adjourned!
And if you want to join in on that, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/cultpopture. Join the Cult Elders tier, and we might read out some of your thoughts and respond to them. But yeah, we talk about titles a lot on this podcast, Richard, because I am obsessed with titles. I made a TikTok about it this week. I do not understand why I'm the only one that seems to care. This should be branding and marketing 101 to make your titles consistent in a franchise. And while IMDb and Amazon Prime and a few other places include Indiana Jones and in the title of Raiders of the Lost Ark, from what I can see, officially it is just called Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's the official title, and I think this is fucking stupid. Just call it Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Why do people fight this? You see the same kind of purist fascination with maintaining these imperfections in franchises with Star Wars, like you mentioned before. Just calling it, like, there is a quiet group of resistance fighters who quietly just refer to it as Star Wars. Star Wars 1977. They don't want to call it.
I think it's an
Hope.
important distinction with Star Wars as well, that there are actually different versions of the film based on what it was titled when you watched it.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. But even then, people, if you type in Star Wars into Letterboxd, it's only going to say Star Wars 1977. It's not going to give you A New Hope as a version. And I just think I couldn't. I think was it Letterboxd, maybe it was something else I discovered that with. Same with Raiders of the Lost Ark. And look, I just think this is insane. I don't understand why people don't want neat categorizations of their favorite franchises, and I feel like nothing looks more aesthetically pleasing than all of your DVDs from a series having the same header in your bookshelf when because everyone buys DVDs.
Well, okay. So what I think, using Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark as an example, is like, if you retitle these and you release a DVD collection that says Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, like, are you having an issue with the fact that, like, the Wikipedia page will still just say that, and then it will have in parentheses after the title be like, later renamed?
It doesn't
blah, blah,
say
blah.
that. That's what I'm saying. Maybe I need to edit a Wikipedia page. Maybe that's the answer to my problem here.
Yeah.
I just think that, and furthermore, I didn't even understand why it wasn't called Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark in the first place, because you've named a character Indiana Jones. Why would you give a character such a crazy name if you weren't going to call the movie after that character? And look, I'm making a mountain out of a molehill probably, because you can buy DVDs that call it Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's less that that's not possible, and more I'm annoyed at this purist sentiment against this idea, because I think it looks better, and I think we need to normalize changing the titles of things to make them consistent with their sequels. I think it's a fine. In fact, Star Wars on Disney Plus have done this. If you go on Disney Plus, all the Star Wars movies are titled as Star Wars : name of film, and I think that's better. And you know what? I even think A New Hope is a pretty cool title for the first Star Wars movie. You know, and I also don't like the idea of having it be like Episode 4, but you watch that first. Like, that's still Episode 1 if you watch it first. Anyway, these are just my thinkings. What are your thinkings on my thinkings?
I get where you're coming from. I think it's an interesting thing in film history that the first Indiana Jones film was just called Raiders of the Lost Ark, and seeing the iconic Indiana Jones logo and font just saying the word Raiders. Because it's super fascinating that they kept that as the typeface, but changed what it says, like the iconic text inside it. I mean, you can fucking release all the Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark DVDs you want. I think this is such a fascinating, we've got to learn from history.
But we're going to get into a minute. We're going to get into all the other things that you can consume that are Indiana Jones, all the other pieces of media, and 100% of them are, have Indiana Jones in the title, and 95% of them follow the formula of Indiana Jones I don't understand why you would have such a protective stronghold of your branding and then not officially retitle the first one if you wanted people to stay, attached to the various things. I don't know. Not exactly the same thing. We did mention this before, but I also find it annoying that Temple of Doom is the only film in the series which features the giant franchise logo as its title card. And I think there's two ways of thinking about this, because when you just see Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade written down, it looks really it feels like we should be seeing something much broader and much happier, much, more epic for such a crazy title for a film. But then, the only one, or Temple of Doom should just be the same, but I don't know, I'm starting to lose my mind. But
You've lost me as well.
What this led me to realize, Richard, is I think the problem is that this series needs some kind of uniform opening titles somewhere in between what we get with Star Wars and what we get with James Bond. Not as like put all your work into it as James Bond, but not as simple as Star Wars, the way they open their films, because the titles don't really work as opening titles. And I think if you're going to use the logo that also looks pretty gaudy, you should just lean into it and do full opening sequences, which brings us to Continue the Franchise, Richard, where we're going to pitch continuations, remixes, or sequels to Indiana Jones. And we're going to start with my Continue the Franchise, which is to recut the films and add title sequences to all of them. Something which I know, again, purists are going to turn off. I'm such a new age film buff because I'm like, we should re-edit classic films. And I have some ideas, and I thought we could go over my ideas. Then we'll discuss the actual sequels and continuations, and then end on your idea. Does that sound cool?
All right. Yeah. Just push out my idea as far as it can.
Pushing the boat out. What does that term mean? What's that usually referring to? Is it like pushing moving the goalposts kind of thing?
Yeah, what
is pushing the boat out? Leave a comment.
It's to be lavish in one's spending or celebrations.
Oh, okay. But we pulled out all the stops?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. But it's weird because like pushing the boat out is like it's tough work.
Yeah,
it's a lot of mahi.
Right. There are fireworks going off outside, so I apologize if you can hear them. So, for Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, obviously the title sequence would come in after Indy escapes on that little plane with the snake, and he's like, I hate snakes. I reckon from there we transition to the famous plane dotting across the map visual language that we see in the series, and use the full title and the full logo. It can swoop in. And because this is the first film, I'm thinking we establish what the normal is, and it's pretty simple, and in between the plane and the map flying from Peru to America, we maybe see some dynamic concept art images from scenes to come in the movie, along with the opening credits. Aesthetically, I'm just thinking like light brown coffee stain kind of map, sort of what the series and promotional tie-in color palette is anyway. For Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, the opening sequence would kick off when Indy, Willie, and Short Round escape on the plane, who they're led into by Dan Aykroyd, by the way, who has a cameo in the film. And we'd once again cut to this map visualization interspersed with concept art, but this time, aesthetically, things would be much darker and grimier, and the map color palette would quickly, like, maybe melt or burn away and be replaced with sort of volcanic black rock and mountain snow white and fire red, and it would look less like scrawlings on a map and more like carvings and rock slabs, and that's the aesthetic, is sort of volcanic rock slab. For Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, this scene would happen at the obvious point, not right after Indiana Jones vanishes, or young Indy vanishes, and we cut to 1936 Indy, but it's when he's traveling back to the university. Visually, I think this would resemble the first film more, but instead of just map-like visuals, we would also have a merging of the scrawlings of Daddy Jones's diary, not my diary, Sean Connery's diary, along with Nazi propaganda, fading in and out, ending with the note page visual language, which comprises the sequence that they'll be burnt up in a fire as if they were a book being thrown into a book burning.
Nice.
For Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, this might be a little too late in the movie, but the most obvious place to put an opening sequence here would be after the nuke the fridge moment, when he's looking at the mushroom cloud, cutting from Indy watching the mushroom cloud and being dragged away and questioned by the FBI. Aesthetically, I'm thinking less of a map and more like a classified FBI document, similar to what we see at the start of Godzilla 2014, but a bit more chipper. And I think that'd be a cool way to be like, it's a more futuristic, sci-fi-esque Indiana Jones movies. And that's my continue the franchise for Indiana Jones.
Love that.
This is not the first time this year that my continue the franchise has been me fixing something inconsistent I don't like about the franchise. So,
I was. So, who would you get to sing the theme songs?
I think it would just be da 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 da, but maybe we invoke different stylistic renditions of it each time, like maybe Temple of Doom becomes a lot scarier and a lot darker, and maybe the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull one sounds like X-Files, like like a sci-fi version of it. So, in terms of actual sequels and prequels to this franchise, boy, is there a lot of ground to cover here across TV.
We should continue the franchise Seekies and Preekies.
We will from now on. So it goes all across TV, literature, video games, and cinema. Most notably would be the currently untitled Indiana Jones 5, which is in production now set for a release in 2023, 15 years after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which is soberingly not that much shorter than the 19-year gap between Last Crusade and Crystal Skull. So,
and if it was the 19-year gap, Indiana Jones in the film could go see Raiders of the Lost Ark.
There you go. The film, what we know of it so far is it boasts a supporting cast of pretty interesting actors, including Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Mads Mikkelsen, Thomas Kretschmann, Boyd Holbrook, Shawnette Renee Wilson, Toby Jones, and Antonio Banderas. But most notably, we'll see a nearly 80-year-old Harrison Ford reprise his role as Indiana Jones, while Steven Spielberg will not be directing, as was originally planned. James Mangold, who did Logan, among other things, is taking the reins instead, and boy, are my feelings on this complicated, because if Ford wasn't so old, if they made this in the 90s, I'd be more inclined to be okay with a new director, but as it stands, and I'm sure this is the minority opinion, I think I'd rather see Spielberg return than Harrison Ford. If I was forced to make the decision between one or the other, I think I'd rather see the world continue under the direction of Steven Spielberg than it be taken by someone else for what will, in a lot of ways be the last movie in the series, I'm sure. It's weird to do the first 4 by one guy and the last one after all these years by another guy.
Yeah, I mean, it is... James Mangold's got a pretty fucking good filmography, and it is, like... it's interesting because Logan was such a success that it's like, and every fucking character there's a clamoring for a Logan style send off. It's like a Logan is like almost
a generic
a
shorthand.
genre unto itself. Yeah. For like this slow Western R-rated, like really get to like what the character's all about.
Definitely something Indiana Jones needs at the age of 80.
Well, but that's the thing is that like you go, yeah, Spielberg's not returning to this big farewell to like an aging character, but James Mangold's doing it, and you're like, fuck, that's probably one of the best names you could have thrown into the ring. Like a really grounded, slow, sort of gritty.
I don't
Indiana
know.
Jones film. Now,
those are what I want from Indiana
what's the film
Jones.
rumored to be about?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, plot-wise, there have been some pretty substantial leaks, and if people want to skip ahead a minute to avoid spoilers, I'll give you 10 seconds.
It'll be more than a minute.
Hello, this is Editing AJ here, just to let you know that if you would like to avoid listening to the spoilers, then skip ahead to 2 hours, 30 minutes, and 19 seconds, and that is when we'll have finished discussing the spoilers. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It sounds like this movie is going to be about time travel, which is hilarious because that feels like a plot mechanic from the same toy box as Aliens. And I can't imagine.
It's insane.
I can't imagine people will react any better to this than they did to
Baffling
Crystal Skull.
decision. Like, to get James Mangold to come in and do time travel, like the pulpiest, most insane thing. Again, like, if you're worried
Richard, you
about,
ask me to direct the last Indiana Jones movie, I'm making it. He goes to get a thing. He goes to, like, I'm making it so fucking traditional as to land the ship after Crystal Skull being about aliens, you know?
yeah, like because there's some of the leaks are that there's like Roman guards and shit like that, and it's like even if you say we're doing time travel, I can understand that you want it to get them back against Nazis. You could have said it now; they're back, but like the Roman
Am I going to the
guards is
future?
like, yeah.
That's a scene. He goes to 2021 and meets a Nazi.
I cannot understand how I can't fathom this film being good. I'm sorry. I will say though that friend of the podcast, we do have a friend of the podcast working on this film who I feel like it's fine to say her name, but Nadeshda Sim, who shout
Pop culture
out
vulture.
to her, pop culture vulture herself, who we had on for Cats and Dogs and 300, is now not just vulturing the films, but is now having a hand in making them. So, congratulations to her. One of her first industry role, just was a night sitting next to Harrison Ford.
Wow.
Very cool. Yeah,
We should interview her. Be like, what's it like just completely surpassing us in terms of pop cultural success?
well, that's what happens when you live in London. They just fucking film movies every which way but loose. Fun fact also that Indiana Jones is our 6th franchise to star Antonio Banderas, but not in the first film.
So, spoilers are over. I guess I'll put a time code in the. I mean, it's too late now, isn't it? Outside of this upcoming sequel, we have the apparently canon edutainment TV series, The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, which aired 28 episodes and 4 TV movies between 1992 and 1996, and followed the globetrotting adventures of an 8 to 10-year-old Indy in the first 5 episodes, and then a 16 to 21-year-old Indy in the remaining 22 episodes, most of which were bookended by the narration of a 93-year-old Indy sporting an eye patch. And this is apparently canon. Except for in Season 2, Episode 5, called Young Indiana Jones and the Mystery of the Blues, which guest-starred Harrison Ford as a 50-year-old Indy who bookended and narrated the episode, which I think is really fucking cool. That there is this small piece of, like, Harrison Ford on screen as Indiana Jones out there that a lot of people don't know about. The series primarily stars Sean Patrick Flannery and Corey Carrier as Indy, with George Hall playing the elderly version of Jones for the bookends. But guest stars across various episodes, we also get Daniel Craig, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Christopher Lee, Clark Gregg, Elizabeth Hurley, Timothy Spall, Jeffrey Knight, Keith David, among other notable names in various episodes, with episodes of the series written and directed by the likes of Frank Darabont, Mike Newell, Joe Johnston, and Carrie Fisher, with George Lucas being the creator of the show and serving a substantial creative role in the series.
Nicholas Roeg also directed an episode with mentioning.
Who's he?
He directed Performance, Don't Look Now, Man Who Fell to Earth. Very weird kind of 70s, almost body horror films. And then he made The Witches.
Right. So there is almost just as much to say about this TV show as there is about the movies.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
So I'll leave it here in saying that the events of the TV show are referenced in Crystal Skull when Indy references riding with Pancho Villa as something that happened in the TV show, apparently. I thought maybe we could do the Harrison Ford episode for a future episode of Film Franchise Follow-Ups on the podcast, on the Patreon. And I'd also like to mention a few of the Tomb Raider-esque video games which came out over the years, if only because I like their titles more than half of the movie titles. These include Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb, Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings, and of course, Indiana Jones and his Desktop Adventures, which I know is probably because it's on a desktop computer, but I like to think it's just him at his desk, playing, spinning a spinning top or something like that. What's your continue the franchise?
Also, interestingly, I've just seen the 50-year-old the 50-year-old Indiana Jones has a beard. Fun fact.
Yep. And
very,
it exists
very handsome.
Less than 10 years before Crystal Skull in canon.
Yeah. So, my one is called, and you're going to hate this title, The Search for Indiana Jones. I almost fucked it up myself.
Indiana Jones and the Search for Indiana Jones.
No, it's just called The Search for Indiana Jones. But yeah, so you would have... I like the idea of Indiana Jones himself being the MacGuffin of the film. Harkening back to my first ever continue the franchise, Lethal Weapon Reloaded, which would feature Riggs missing, and the whole thing would be about a search for Riggs. And as for the sort of main character of the film, I think it would be... I mean, you're essentially, you're flipping the dynamic of Last Crusade, that, and then obviously Indy would be there for the end of it. But I was throwing around ideas that he could end up being found in a role like the guy guarding the Holy Grail, that it's like he's been there for 400 fucking years.
Right. And,
one of these things where he's found something that's cursed him with eternal life. Again, similar to my continue the franchise for Pirates of the Caribbean. But it could either be Short Round, which, you would either have Stephen Yeun, Henry Golding, take your pick, of the couple of Asian actors that Hollywood has the phone number of. But I thought we could play a fun game, because I wouldn't bring back Shia LaBeouf, but the character of Henry Jones III could be played by another 35-year-old actor. So, our options: Drake Bell.
Oh, God.
The number one on famousbirthdays.com, Robert Pattinson.
Hell yeah. It'd be great.
Yeah. Richard Madden.
Second time he's come up on a podcast in a week.
Frankie Muniz.
No. No, thank you.
No. Justin Burfield.
Oh, yeah.
He's due for a resurgence, isn't he?
No,
Reese.
He's going to fade away and never be seen or heard from again.
Jai Courtney.
No.
He would get it. He would be cast, wouldn't he?
He would get it. Yeah, you're right.
He absolutely would, yeah. Yeah, the thing is... Oh, Wyatt Russell? Fuck yeah.
Yeah, he should have played him to begin with.
Yeah, Wyatt Russell.
There, we found him. We always find the perfect one.
That's the thing, we always do.
Wyatt Russell, the rich man's Shia LaBeouf. Sounds good, man. I like it. I'll sanction the title just for you, just for this one time.
Or what would you call it?
Indiana Jones and the Search for Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones has gone missing.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to our favourite segment of the show, Richard, which is called Rank That Franchise, a segment we love, where over on our Letterboxd account, letterboxd.com/cultpopture, we have a list where we have ranked all 142 franchises from best to worst, and it's now time to rank Raiders of the Lost Ark, and not India, because we rank it by the first movie, and the name of the franchise is not in the first movie. Anyway, okay. Where are we ranking this? Because I'm thinking pretty fucking
above
high.
the Muppets, below the MCU.
It's a very quick draw. What? Okay, convince me below the MCU. I agree not above Scream, but I'm more inclined to put it above the MCU pound for
So
pound.
chuck it there.
You're no fun anymore. I think that this is such a good series, and for it to have the third one be what we think is the best one, I think is pretty significant. And if you look at the Rotten Tomatoes scores, they're all pretty high. And it's funny, we have a denotation on our ranking called a gold star franchise, which we give to certain franchises in which it is generally agreed that there is no worst one in the franchise. And while the Rotten Tomatoes score support the idea of Indiana Jones being a gold star franchise, this is a rare case where I'm looking at Rotten Tomatoes and I'm going, I'm sorry, there is a universally agreed upon worst one in the franchise. So I don't think we can give it the gold star, but we can place it at 9, the 9th best franchise we've ever watched.
Hot damn.
That feels big. That feels like it deserves to be there.
That's 3 franchises we've added to the top 10 this year.
Oh, very nice.
So far, who knows? Because Rise of the Planet of the Apes is number 2. And what was the other one? Rocky is number 3.
Yeah.
And Jumanji just at number 11, now number 12, actually.
Yeah, then edged out.
Mm.
It's still,
and
but we
Death
still
Note at number 16.
we still
What a
added
good
it to
year
the
we've
top
had.
10 this year.
Yeah.
Jumanji. It just got pushed out. Cool. Well, now that brings us to Franchise Roulette, Richard. We haven't done this in a long time. So this is the part of the show where we're going to decide. Well, we're not going to decide. We're going to find out what the next franchise we're going to
decide
to cover in 2 weeks' time for the next episode of Film Franchise Fortnights. We've done this we have a big list of all the franchises we could think of at one point, and we're going to pull out a random number generator, pull a random number, and then Richard is going to make me guess what that franchise is.
Damn right I am. I will say,
Mm.
and I'm comfortable saying this on pod.
Okay.
I am. We did this for Funvember. I'm going to leave 2 film franchises in the mix for
Okay.
this, but that is because in the interest of content for the fans, just to potentially make things easier on us, because it is the most wonderful time of the year. Netflixmas is upon us.
Yeah.
And as always, there's a lot of films to watch. We have done away with this year. We've done away with off week, we call them, non-film franchise Fortnights week podcasts where we have to watch movies and stuff because I don't have as much free time as I used to. But Netflixmas is so important to us here at the Cult Popture podcast that we are going to be doing it. But one of we either not do Netflixmas or we have to sort of allow ourselves to maybe have an easier time watching films. I'm not saying we're definitely going to have one. It's just they're going to be in the mix, and maybe don't be surprised if we're not watching that many films for next week.
2 film franchises back on the list being like, well. You must be truly desperate to come to me for help.
And thank you for doing that, because I dropped my phone quite a while ago. And I've got an email about my tenancy.
Anything
What's
good?
this? Well, let's find out. Oh no, it's the details of my flat inspection on Thursday. What did they say? We carried out a property inspection. Thanks for keeping it tidy. We're happy. Thanks for taking care of it. Sweet.
Ideal.
Next inspection scheduled for February 2022, but our tenancy ends in January. So,
I had to email my flat inspector at my old flat and tell them I have depression, and that's why my room is so messy all the time. I don't have depression. I'm just a messy person and don't think it's a flat inspector's place to tell me that I need to clean up my room.
I've always, flat inspections are always a touchy thing. Like, my ex would, flat inspections were like it has to look like no one lives here kind of thing. And I'm like, it's fine to have things out and about. It should just be generally tidy.
Mm.
Like, you should tidy up your room or whatever. And if nothing else, so that they can, because they want to see the whole floor, shit like that,
Yeah.
But it's like, it's not an open home.
No.
It's just, you're allowed to live here.
Indiana Jones and the flat inspection.
The scariest
Too scary for children.
of all. All right, so
He's actually created the R14 rating, PG-14.
the franchise
11.
Did you hear that?
Franchise number 11. But before you get to that, Richard, I do just want to tell people that if you've enjoyed our podcast, if this is your first time flying with Cold Popture, then please get on all our social medias. I would say mainly follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We're at Cold Popture over there. You can also join the Discord, which there'll be a link to in the show notes. Come and say hi. Tell us what you think is the best Indiana Jones movie. And you can also support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Cold Popture, and subscribe to our various YouTube channels, etc. Richard, is 11 maybe the lowest number we've ever drawn in franchise roulette?
Yeah, not if you're including our short-lived YouTube Patreon show where we seemingly got single-digit numbers every
right,
time.
Of course.
What was that
from
called?
the franchise
From franchise list. Yeah, it might be. I was going to say up there, but down there. All right, so number 11 is a trilogy.
Oh,
Any guesses?
Lord of the Rings.
No, actually, I'm just going to quickly fact check the trilogy. I know it is a trilogy, but here's a clue: there is something more coming soon.
Toy Story. Wait, no, that's not trilogy.
No, it's there's a new film coming next year.
Oh, what genre is it?
Family.
Is it Cheaper by the Dozen?
No, that's number one on the franchise.
I
list.
knew
You
that
know
was
it.
number one, but there is a new one coming out. Is it a similar thing to that? Is it like a Disney?
It is a Disney Plus exclusive. The new movie.
Man, is it? No, it's not 3 Men and a Baby. It's not. Is it Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
No. There's a lot of fucking new Disney Plus
I'm
fourth
doing
films
pretty
coming.
good.
Eh?
Is it Night at the Museum?
It is not at the museum.
It's Night at the Museum. The next one's animated. Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's fucking rock Night at the Museum trilogy
man.
next fortnight. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you for sticking around for our very long episode on Indiana Jones, everybody. We hope you enjoyed it. And stay tuned for the post-credit scene that we're going to be doing after this music stops. And we'll see you next week for Netflixmas, because the sleigh bells are a-ringing in my ears.
Yeah, and also if you are a patron or of our Patreon, or you want to become one and suggest for our last episode of Film Franchise Fortnights for the year, because after we've only got 2 franchises left this year, Night at the Museum, which does any of Night at the Museum take place around Christmas? It feels like it would.
I feel
right?
like there's snow in the first one. Like it's at least set in during winter.
Okay, I'm going Night at the Museum, Control F, Christopher Columbus.
Again! Second time he's come up on this episode.
It came out It came out on December 22nd. Okay, sweet.
We'll take
That
it.
counts. We didn't limit ourselves to a Christmas franchise roulette, but because there aren't that many Christmassy franchises left. However, the Patreon poll, which we will be posting in the day or two after this episode comes out, we're encouraging Christmassy franchises.
I'm thinking of opening it up to wintry franchises.
Wintry franchises or any kind of franchises that evoke that kind of spirit. I think.
Yeah.
Similar to like Ice Age would count.
Yeah.
Cold franchises.
The
Cold
Shining.
franchise Fortnights.
The Shining and Doctor Sleep.
Yeah. Go fucking wild. So the two franchises left this year. Fun fact.
Nice.
And Netflixmas is underway.
Alrighty. See you later, everybody.
And, I guess bye as well. Thanks for listening. Did you say where to find everything? You did.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, cool.
We're going to the post-credit scene now. Have you got it pulled up?
Probably while I was reading my tenancy.
It was. Welcome to the post-credit scene, everybody. Where if you join our cult member tier for $5 or more, you get to give us something to talk about. And this, the post-credit scene. Richard, who's it from and what is it?
Well, I can tell you both of those things. If the page doesn't fucking refresh every time I scroll down. Here we go. Joe Rundle. This is the 96th post-credit scene. Joe Rundle from Patreon. I was going to do like, where are you from? But I don't know. So, Joe Rundle, is there something you want to see adapted into a franchise? No, to answer your question.
Are there any Disney rides left or anything like that that could be kind of interesting?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, does this question cover? I guess it counts as for films that don't have sequels, right? And that's like, what would you want to see?
Oh, is that what they're asking? I thought they meant just something that isn't a franchise being turned into.
Yeah,
a
well,
franchise.
I think it's open for interpretation.
Okay, well, I'm going to look up movies without sequels. We've had this question before, I think, and I said, "Who Framed Roger Rabbit?"
Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I think, is a fantastic answer.
Oh, thank you so much.
So you want to see it turned into a franchise? Yeah, I'll be honest. If we're talking outside of films that don't have sequels, which Roger Rabbit's a great answer to, and District 9's the other obvious one, is like I'm not really a fan of I can't think of anything else that I'm a fan of. That's like not a film, that like something that I would be that like a world that I would be that invested in that doesn't come from film. Like there's no
the Seven Deadly Sins cinematic universe.
The Seven Deadly cinematic universe. Yeah, like there's no books or games or anything like that I am overly invested in that I can think of.
Yeah. I went on an insider.com list of popular movies that never had a sequel, and the only one I saw before the please turn off your ad blocker pop-up came, making it unusable, was Bridesmaids. So I'm going to say Bridesmaids should be a franchise.
I think they should make The Matrix into a franchise. It's a shame they never made any sequels.
Oh, Richard, you are devilish.
And I'm wearing Prada.